news. It came out. It was about largest fentanyl seizure. It was 25 pounds, 3 gallons of liquid fentanyl that was seized in coordination with our task forces under the license plate reader program with Stone Garden Partners. Now, fentanyl, again, is a very dangerous drug, just as Chief Malden had mentioned. So for us, it's something that's of high concern.
Gotcha. Well, can I follow up on that? And congratulations on that seizure.
Thank you, sir.
That's a big deal, and we thank you for your service. The statistics I'm looking at say that over 90% of fentanyl seizures occur at the ports of entry or at vehicle checkpoints, and not between. Although there are significant cases, as you point out, that are taking place between. Who would best be able to speak to us about what's taking place at the ports of entry? Because I understand both of you are sort of in the intermediate points. Is that right?
Yes, sir. So I think I would probably refer you to our Director of Field Operations. They work under CBP, but they are the ones that have command and control of our ports of entry at CBP.
And they're the central force interdicting fentanyl today across the border.
They're the ones that have oversight of all ports of entry, who would be the ones to be the proper witness for that.
Gotcha. And they're not here today?
They are not, sir. Thank
you. What's even more puzzling to me in terms of the political rhetoric is that 86% of the people convicted of fentanyl smuggling in 2021 were American citizens, not foreign nationals or unauthorized immigrants, right? But U.S. citizens who are on the payroll of the smuggling operations of the cartels. Is that the same as your understanding, Chief Chavez?
I know that in some cases where we have arrested or interdicted and arrested folks for drug smuggling, it has been American citizens, but I don't have the statistic to my knowledge at this time whether the majority have been American citizens.
Okay, well, and I'll share with you the statistics that we got from the CBP about that. But let me ask you this. Will the operational security of our border be strengthened by the 300 additional Border Patrol agents and 500 support staff that will be added as a result of the latest funding bill that we passed in December? Is that going to help?
Sir, any type of funding, any type of support that we can get from our congressional representatives to assist us with the type of support to enforce this type of, or to try and prosecute any type of drug smugglers at the border is going to assist us.
Gotcha. Chief Maudlin, let me come to you for a second. As a Border Patrol chief, is it part of your responsibility to try and determine and assess the underlying causes of migration in the Western Hemisphere? Or are you just on the operational side?
Thanks for the question, sir. So I think it's a complicated question. So the nature of the work I do, yes, that is part of it. However, what we focus on, what my primary responsibility is to execute on policy and law and just to secure the border, regardless of who comes across it, whoever's trafficking, be it a foreign national or a U.S. national. It is just to interdict whatever crosses and then place it in the proper pathway, sir.
Gotcha. So you're not really interested in the why of how they got there. You're just interested in stopping the people who are showing up at the border.
So, sir, I would not say I'm not interested in the why. That's I'm sorry, I'm at the beginning of my statement about the complexities of it.
Yeah.
So we have incredibly robust intelligence shops that look at this, because the why will generally tell us where the traffic is likely to come next and then where we can best deploy our resources to mitigate that.
Great. All right. Well, maybe we'll get to hear from some of those people that are involved on the intelligence side to try to analyze what's going on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Higgins for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we're going to be moving very fast today just because of the sheer volume of evidence that must be investigated by Congress is quite extensive. And America should understand that today's hearing marks the beginning of this committee's obligation to judiciously reveal over the course of many months exactly what has happened at our southern border over the last 2 years. We will investigate, we will reveal the truth, and we will force accountability. I'd like to comment before my questions begin that the talking points regarding fentanyl from my colleagues across the aisle, it had 500,000 gotaways in 2021 and 600,000 in 2022. These are known gotaways. This does not count the unknown gotaways. But let's just say that's a number. That's over 1 million gotaways. That's stout young men running, as the chief testified, wearing camouflage. They're rolling hard. They got mil-spec radios. They're carrying backpacks. They work for the drug cartels. What do you think's in the backpack? Every American watching this understands there's a tremendous amount of illicit fentanyl and meth crossing between the ports of entry. Chief Modlin and Chief Chavez, I'm going to ask you to keep your answers to yes or no as much as possible. You can expound upon your answers in writing, of course, afterwards, but we'll be moving fast. Chief Modlin, would you agree that part of your job as a career enforcement professional, law enforcement, is to execute policies communicated to you from people above you at your chain of command?
Sir, my job is absolutely to execute policy.
Thank you. And Chief Chavez, you also agree that you're given policies to carry out by those above you in your chain of command?
Yes, sir. My job is to execute on the policies
Thank you.
administered by my chain of command.
Chief Modlin, do you participate in telephone calls with your upchain discussing how to carry out policies that are directed by Department of Homeland Security leadership?
Thank you, sir. It is rare to have detailed discussions about how to execute. That is really the job of the chief patrol agent, to determine how to execute the policies.
And do you have conversations on the telephone with your upchain regarding policy and the execution of policy?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Chief Chavez, do you also participate in telephone calls of that nature?
Same response as Chief Mullen, sir. We as chiefs determine the execution of the policy. We interpret the policy, discuss it with my subordinate personnel, and then we execute on the policy.
Thank you, Chief. I'd like to hear from each of you. Are there policies that are communicated through verbal commands, either from your upchain through your office and down chain? Are there policies that are communicated through verbal commands that are not documented in written communications like emails, texts, official letters, official policy statements, etc.?
Thanks again, sir. Most policies are either written or in policy.
Are there some policies that are not written?
Well, sometimes we are informed of a policy verbally before it becomes.
And who would inform you? You're the chief. Would that be your upchain chief?
Yes, sir. That would be the,
Thank you.
the chief of
So,
operations.
are you clarifying for this committee, Chief, I ask respectfully, are there some policies that are directed to be carried out by you and your chain of command below that is not documented in writing, email, memorandum, etc., verbal commands?
Sir, I'm going through my head trying to remember the last time that happened. I would say it's exceptionally rare. And if it is, it's usually just to
exceptionally rare. I would accept that as an answer, but you're acknowledging that does happen.
I'm acknowledging that it could. That I would not say it never has. I just can't remember when it
Chief
has.
Chavez?
And I would say and clarify policy versus procedures and direction, because we do get phone calls on a certain procedure or direction as it relates to instructions on a certain type of, for example, demographic of a certain population of migrant. We're going to change the course of this demographic because we are now going to process a certain individual Nicaragua persons coming this way. Now we're going to process them in this direction. That's not a policy. That's a procedure. That's a different type of instruction that is given to us verbally or via email. But policies is normally written. Policies that we get a heads up. New policy is coming down the pipe. It's going to require this, but wait for the policy to hit the signature coming down from.
Thank you, Chief, for that clarification. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. If anyone has time to yield, I'll receive it later.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair recognizes Ms. Porter for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking Chief Modlin and Chief Chavez for sharing your stories today. And one of the things I particularly wanted to acknowledge and appreciate about your testimony, Chief Modlin, is you acknowledged that our borders are not monoliths. You have served, both of you, in many different parts and pockets of our border, and the challenges that we face are different. And I appreciate you taking the time to acknowledge that, and I hope that my colleagues will recognize that the challenges we face in rural areas like RGV and Tucson are different than what we face in coastal borders and areas like San Diego sector. I wanted to focus on fentanyl and continue the line of questioning of the chairman. I want to introduce, with permission, Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce into evidence this chart, which is based on Customs and Border Patrol data. And I know it's hard to see, but I think you can probably see if you look at the screen. This big jump, this is fentanyl seized at the border. There's a big jump here, and that big jump occurred around June 2020, August 2020. Mr. Moblin, did anything happen then that caused any policy procedure change that caused that big jump in fentanyl seizures?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. And what I will say is that I very much appreciate the beginning of your statement about the variety of the border. And what I would say is we're always grateful when any members come down and see the border. And what I would certainly emphasize is that if you've seen one Border Patrol sector, you've only seen one Border Patrol sector. And what's going on in Tucson is vastly different than what's going on in RGV. As to that jump, I'm unaware of what that jump is, ma'am.
Have you seen data like this suggesting that there's been an increase in fentanyl seizures?
Yes.
Ms. Chavez, Chief Chavez, are you aware of this jump in seizures, and do you have any explanation for why in about June, July, August 2020, we saw this big increase?
I do not have knowledge of that chart in particular, but we are aware that fentanyl seizures have gone up. I just don't have specific information related to that chart.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up in writing to ask about this, because I think what's interesting about this is, of course, we had a change in president in 2020 and some changes in border policy. And what we can see here is that the facts show we are seizing a lot more fentanyl. And for me, as a mom, that is a sign of success. I don't want that fentanyl in this country. It is dangerous and it kills people and it makes our communities dangerous. And to me, this is a sign that our Border Patrol and our agents at our ports of entry, which is, of course, where the vast majority of the fentanyl is seized, as you've acknowledged, are doing their jobs. What I find interesting is, despite success here, what we're hearing is an effort to characterize seizures as failures. And that is a change. So what we've seen from my colleagues is tweets that say, over 800 pounds of fentanyl seized. This is Biden's border crisis. That's a tweet from Rep. Stefanik. To me, the fact that you're seizing these drugs is a success. So I think that there's a need here to acknowledge the successful work that you're doing, and I appreciate that. I wanted to ask, as Border Patrol agents, distinguished from those who work at ports of entry doing inspection, are we focusing enough energy and resources on detection and staffing at ports of entry? Because I have been to San Ysidro. I have seen the volume of cars, pedestrians that they are trying to process in a day. The more we do at ports of entry to halt smuggling of fentanyl, does that push it into more dangerous sectors and out into the border areas where you are? In other words, we're squeezing one part of it down, doing more with detection, with technology, X-ray. Is that then pushing people into these more dangerous, different tactics? Mr. Moblin, do you have thoughts on this, Chief Moblin?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks again. So first, if you don't mind, I'm just going to circle back real quick to the spike in fentanyl, because sometimes answers come to me a little later than they probably should. But I would say that perhaps that is also because of the recognition of fentanyl, getting the canines trained to detect fentanyl. I mean, I would look at certainly when we started to see fentanyl in that, and then, of course, the technology to detect it as well. In terms of the ports, what I will tell you is that I doubt there's anybody working in CBP's Office of Field Operations that would say they don't need more people and technology as well as the Border Patrol, but certainly I would defer that to our headquarters. But what I will say is that your point is exactly right. What happens at the ports affects outside the port. So, criminals are always going to go to the path of least resistance. And if the ports are the path of least resistance, they will go there. If between the ports are there, they'll go there. And ultimately, it's not our concern who's trafficking the fentanyl, just that we keep it out of the country so that all of us parents feel safe and know that it's not going to be in our kids' schools.
I appreciate that, Chief, and I would just say the big jump here is coming from the ports of entry. The Border Patrol has been relatively consistent in the amount of fentanyl, so we're clearly doing something much more effectively at our ports of entry to seize fentanyl, and I would just urge the chairman in the spirit of bipartisanship to suggest that we bring in some of our ports of entry officers so we can hear about the technologies and the things that they are doing that are resulting in these kinds of successes. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good to see you, Chief Chavez and Chief Modlin, again. I think I met you, Chief Chavez, first in El Paso, and so it's good to see both of you here. And first want to say thanks to your line agents and your team who do such an incredible job fighting this fight, and it is a real fight. My first question is this. What does CBP and Intelligence Division tell you that the percentage of drugs that are being interdicted crossing the southern border? In other words, I know what they've told me. I'm not sure I can say it publicly, but you can. What have they told you? What's the percentage that's being interdicted? Chief Modlin?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. I can tell you, I don't know that I've ever seen or heard a briefing that said what they thought the percentage of effectiveness was in terms of narcotics. I can tell you that, we do have a measurement to measure the effectiveness of the border security efforts. And unfortunately, currently in Tucson sector, we tend to be at about 60% effectiveness. And that's due to all of the points I made in the opening statements and one of my earlier responses about the cartels saturating our agents, and of course all the rescues that take place and everything else going on.
You get diverted, and then both of your sectors are vastly different. In fact, in Arizona, the Tucson sector is very different than the Yuma sector, totally different. So, but the question that we're hearing is that most fentanyl is interdicted at the ports. Of course, OFO is going to interdict most of it because that's where they have extra machines, dogs, all the personnel and equipment there. And when you have over 1 million people coming in between the border, many of them, as you said, I think you guys stopped 216,000, Chief Modlin, young single adult males in camo carrying backpacks. So it's a very different thing. So you can ignore that you only catch about 15% roughly at the ports of entry. You've got a major problem. Chief Modlin, I want to talk briefly about the manpower into the Tucson sector. I've been told by agents on the ground that some of Tucson's agents are being farmed out or being allowed to go to other sectors. Is that accurate?
Thanks again for the question, sir. So there are some agents from the Tucson sector that are outside the Tucson sector. It's a small number. I believe it might be about 20 to 30 now that are going to other sectors. Tucson sector, in terms of personnel, is the largest sector. We have more agents than any other sector. So often Tucson sector is utilized for things like that. And then Tucson sector also has the largest special operations detachment as well, which is comprised of Borstar and Bortax. So they're often used in places where we see an increase in migrant rescues, water rescues. Then the teams will be deployed as well.
And you also have the largest number of known gotaways along the southwest border.
Sir, I believe that's Del Rio sector, just barely ahead of us. But
you guys you're fighting.
Ours is a very significant number, yes, sir.
So when I look at that, I guess the question is, because I've been down there many times, how many of your line agents get diverted to detention and processing?
Yes, sir. Again, thanks for the question. So this is constantly a challenge with us. As you know, border security operations are incredibly complex. Currently, about 20% of our uniformed personnel are in processing. Thankfully, as Chief Chavez noted earlier, the Border Patrol is starting to utilize Border Patrol processing coordinators that are not law enforcement, that can do a lot of the work that Border Patrol agents have traditionally been doing that's outside the interdiction work and the work where someone needs to be sworn law enforcement.
So let's consider this. If you have an agent that tracks someone, and maybe it's a group of 20 people in the Tucson sector, they can be literally 4 hours before you're going to see anybody able to even come out and pick them up and transport them?
Yes, sir. So the very difficult thing about the Tucson sector, multiple mountain ranges, 9,000 feet up, and many times these migrants get up into those mountains. It can take an entire shift to track a group, as you described, and even then, they can be apprehended hours from the nearest paved road.
And that'll also keep agents off the line and leave a wide open sector.
Yes, sir. It all adds to what our agents have to do out in the field, whether it's a rescue, whether it's an apprehension.
Thanks. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Conley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Chief Modlin and Chief Chavez for being here. Thoughtful testimony. Really appreciate your approach. I just want to point out, though, that part of what we're dealing here in this hearing and in lots of other discussions about this subject is, the narrative being woven that is a false narrative. We need more capacity and personnel at the border, at ports. Well, we had that opportunity in the omnibus. And on this side of the aisle, we all supported it. But on the other side, that isn't the case. So you can talk a good game about we need to beef up, our capacity here and there. But you had an opportunity to vote for $7.2 billion for Border Patrol operations. $65 million for 300 new Border Patrol agents, $60 million for CBP personnel at the ports of entry we're talking about, and $230 million for between the ports technology that you referenced, Chief Modlin. So if we're going to be consistent and talk about the need to beef up the border, you got to vote for it. Otherwise, it's just hot air. Another part of the narrative is, we have all these people crossing the border, and they violate the law multiple times and never show up, of course, for court hearings. And that's really interesting because in the Alternatives to Detention program, I guess last year there were 16,482 undocumented individuals. And I don't know, Chief Modlin, do you know what percentage of those people showed up at their court hearing?
Thank you for the question, sir. What I can say is that I don't have an answer for that. So Border Patrol's role in interdiction ends once we serve somebody with an NTA. Once they leave our custody, then we have no means of tracking that. If you don't mind me just circling back to what you said in the beginning about funding the Border Patrol, as I would say to everyone is that, obviously the Border Patrol would like as much funding as we could get. We definitely need more personnel. We need more technology. However, we are a very small piece of this border security issue. And groups like ICE ERO, when they don't have bed space, that's when we see all the other issues.
And I'm going to get to that. I thank you for that intervention. By the way, the answer is 99.4%. So of those individuals, 99.4% showed up for their court hearing. And that's not an anomaly. The American Immigration Council looked at the record over the last 11 years, and they looked at over 2.5 million people who crossed the border in that time period. 83% showed up for the court hearings. So it's not, exactly the Wild West in terms of people complying with their court proceedings. And by the way, you were talking about new capacity, not just personnel. So the president announced putting new scanners at land points of entry on the southern border, 123 of them. And that's going to increase inspection of passenger vehicles from, I think, 2% to 40%. And for cargo vehicles, from 17% to 70%. Chief Modlin, would that add to your capacity? Would that, do you think, be a material contribution to helping us secure the border better and in the fight against fentanyl?
Thank you, sir. So if I understood correctly, you're talking about some scanners that are going to be deployed to the ports of entry.
That's right.
And so, yes, so that is not where the Border Patrol is at. Obviously, the border is holistic, and so any security of the border is good security of the border. What I would say, though, is that, again, as the ports get strengthened, then it will push more to in between the ports of entry.
Right.
Because, again, the criminal organizations just want to move whatever commodity it is, whether it's people or narcotics.
We understand, but right now, most of that fentanyl is coming through legal ports of entry. So beefing that up adding that capacity obviously makes some sense. But you're right, we're going to be concerned that an unintended effect isn't to push it down or in between. We've got to beef up capacity, and that's what we're trying to do with respect to that.
Will the gentleman yield to a question?
Well, I'm almost out of time. Chief Chavez, would you like to comment on what I've been discussing with Chief Modlin?
Yes, sir. The scanners going to the port of entry, that's really for the Director of Field Operations to provide some input on. I'm sure they're going to be very useful for them because it's technology, and just like for the Border Patrol, technology is critical between the ports of entry, and they've been very useful, especially automated technology.
But I think you would agree, and my time's almost up, to go from 17% of inspection of cargoes to 70% is quite a significant jump, and hopefully becomes a very useful tool for depressing the introduction of illegal fentanyl into the United States.
For our partners in blue, I'm sure my partners in blue would very much appreciate that increase
Thank
in
you.
efficiency.
Thank you both for being here. My time is up.
Chair recognizes Mr. Grofman for 5 minutes.
Okay. First question, kind of a follow-up on what we had in the past. I've been at the border many times. The Border Patrol always seems to believe that the vast amount of the guys that I talk to, gals down there, they feel that most of the fentanyl is coming across not at the points of entry, but other places for the obvious, but it is not caught as much because you don't have gotaways at the points of entry. In other words, there's, even now, I believe you told me over half the fentanyl was coming in between the points of entry. But if you were going to sneak fentanyl across, you would not want to contact the Border Patrol first. Am I accurate in that?
Thank you, sir. So the question gets to, I believe, what we were talking about earlier, which was the gotaways, and then, of course, the unknowns, the stuff that we don't know. So, yes, potentially there is no way to know what is inside that group, both of those groups together.
Right. They felt that actually the last time I was down there was a decrease of fentanyl caught at people sneaking across the border because you had less people to monitor that area because they were spending all day doing paperwork on the people who are coming in the points of entry. Am I right in that?
So what I can tell you, sir, is that there is, I think as I stated earlier, about 20% of the agents currently are doing processing, sort of the care of migrants that are in our custody and are not actively securing the border. What I would say, too, and I think it's one of the things we missed when we were talking about hard narcotics, I know the focus has been on fentanyl, however, but also in terms of the amount of meth that we've seized in the Tucson sector, which is still an incredibly dangerous hard narcotic, 93% of that is caught outside of our checkpoints. So that is absolutely trafficked on people that are crossing the border.
Right. All people you encounter deal with the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol does not deal with the approximately 60,000 people a month who are gotaways. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now, I want to give you some overall numbers because they're just so unbelievable. I want to confirm that they're accurate. 2 years ago, in December, there were about 21,000 people who came across the border, both released family units and single adults as well as gotaways. We have in 2 years gone from about 21,000 to 238,000 the most recent December. Are those numbers accurate? In 2 years, we've gone from 21,000 to 238,000?
Sir, one, I don't know why, but I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you, but I hear you asking about the numbers over years.
Well, I'll say again.
Much better, sir.
2 years ago, there were, in December, there were approximately 20,000 people coming across the border, both encounters and gotaways combined. We've now gone from 21,000 to 238,000. That's almost unbelievable. Do you believe those numbers are accurate?
I don't have December's numbers, sir. But what I can tell you is, so fiscal year 18, 19, and 20, Tucson sector had about 60,000 apprehensions. 21, 190,000 apprehensions. So we tripled the previous year, or had all three of those years combined. Last year it quadrupled. Last year it was 250,000. We're 20,000 ahead right now. So we went from what I would describe as unprecedented to a point where I don't have the correct adjective to describe what's going on.
Okay. Something in the past was said about children being separated from their families or children being separated from both parents. Are there unaccompanied minors coming across the border? And are there children coming across the border with one parent, which inevitably means, or not always, but frequently means that we're separating families or families are being separated at the border?
Yes, sir. So in Tucson sector, we do see unaccompanied children. It's not an enormous part of our population. It's probably about 7% of the population we deal with, maybe less, are unaccompanied children. I do believe it's a much bigger issue in Rio Grande Valley, sir.
Okay, I think 7% of, well, unaccompanied children in the most recent month were about 8,000 to the 238,000 people who came across. I still think 8,000 unaccompanied children coming across the border every month is significant to those children, right? 8,000 is a lot, wouldn't you think?
Sir, again, monthly, that's high, at least in Tucson sector. In 22, in fiscal year 22, we apprehended 19,000 unaccompanied children in Tucson sector, which, again, is still a very significant number and a great drain on our resources.
I don't consider 19,000 insignificant. I think that's a tragedy for just one area. One final comment before I let go of the microphone. This comment today that we're having this hearing to amplify white conspiracy theories is one of the most offensive things I've seen since I've been here. And I would invite any of the Democrats, other than the ranking minority member, to maybe put out a press release or something if you disagree with this. Because this is such an inflammatory thing to put out there to the American public. We're having a hearing on the border and it's for white conspiracy. I mean, it's just awful what you people do. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Stansberry for 5 minutes. Or Ms. Stansberry, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for convening this panel today, and I do mean that sincerely, because as a New Mexican, I am one of only a few members on this committee who actually represents a border state, in actuality. And it is a crisis. What we are seeing on the southern border is a crisis, but it is not a crisis as our friends across the aisle would have us believe. It is truly a humanitarian crisis. And it is a crisis that has been manufactured, reproduced over and over again, decade after decade, by inaction by this body, by individuals who refuse to engage in bipartisan immigration reform, by individuals who refuse to understand that there are millions of lives being held in the balance, people who have traveled thousands of miles across continents, across the ocean, to come to this country to seek refuge, safety, and opportunity. Just like many of our forefathers and foremothers who came to this country, we are a nation of immigrants, alongside our brothers and sisters of our indigenous communities. My own ancestors who came here for opportunity, seeking refuge in this country. That is why people are coming here to our southern border. And the inaction of this body in passing bipartisan immigration reform, in supporting those who proudly serve our country and are working on our southern border, the inability for this body to act and actually fund programs so that we can have a just, humane, and equitable immigration system in this country is the moral failing and stain on this body. So we can talk about a crisis at the border, but let's talk about what it actually is, and that's a humanitarian crisis. I also want to say, as somebody on this committee who is not only representing a border state, I am someone who has actually lost loved ones to the fentanyl crisis. It is an absolute crisis. To know the pain of what it feels like to lose someone to fentanyl is something that I think many people in this room do not understand, but American people all across the country understand. We should not be playing politics with people's lives. This is serious. People's lives are in the balance. There are deaths happening all across our country because of these issues. So let's talk about the humanitarian crisis. Let's talk about these issues in reality and not try to score political brownie points and get cable TV moments. This is about our communities and about our families. Now, let's be clear. The system is terribly broken, and that is why we need bipartisan reform. It's why we need action in this body. And the cost of inaction is falling on our communities. In fact, thousands of people who have come to this country to seek refuge end up in my home state. And because we are not properly funding these programs, it is the people of New Mexico who time and time again have had to stand up and help people by helping to house them, feed them. Our government is failing. The system is failing. We need action. And it is the inhumane policies of the previous administration that have contributed to this crisis. In fact, under the Trump administration, thousands of children were separated from their parents. And to this day, because it was so haphazardly implemented, over 1,000 children are still separated from their parents to this day. I know, Chief Chavez, you work in the Rio Grande district. I want to ask you, in the course of your work and your agent's work, and thank you for your service, have you met some of the families and children who have come across the border?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question, and thank you for acknowledging the vulnerable population of children. For every Border Patrol agent that works that border, I assure you that our heart goes out to those children that show up unaccompanied, on their own.
And Agent Chavez, you have actually met these children and families. These are vulnerable populations. They are families, oftentimes children who have traveled hundreds and thousands of miles by themselves. In addition to that, the Trump administration massively expanded the use of private for-profit prisons, which are lining the pockets of private corporations right now, charging communities like mine millions of dollars a month to detain immigrants in prisons. These are folks who have already been screened to be safe. And I want to ask our witnesses
The lady's
here
time has
today,
expired.
have you actually been to these private detention centers? A yes answer is...
Feel free to answer the question.
I've been, the children that we hold at our facilities, temporary holding facilities.
The for-profit private prisons where asylum seekers are being held.
I am not aware. I have not attended those locations.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Gosar for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. And I don't know about geography. I know the gentlelady's from New Mexico, but you go out and look to your west, and you got 2 members from Arizona here, and you got members from Texas. So I represent much of Yuma County, and where my constituents are hit hard by this Biden open border crisis. I hear from them every day. In fact, the CEO of the hospital there showed that they had $20 million of uncompensated care in just 1 year. Joe Biden does have a plan. His plan was to deliberately open our borders and cede power to the cartels. Here's some headlines. Fox News from January 18, 2023. Border under control of the cartels, not the U.S. Yuma residents say as gangs rake in billions off of human smuggling. Yahoo News from September 22, 2022. Majority of Americans think cartels have more control over the border than the U.S. government. Poll. Now, why would Biden do this? To create chaos? To sow discord? What is the answer to this mess for Biden and the Democrats? More Big Brother? More control? Even changing our culture? Instead of empowering these 2 brave individuals and the rest of the Border Patrol seated here in front of us, with the tools they need to stem the invasion of illegal aliens, Biden sends billions upon billions to Ukraine to protect the border of another country. Under Biden, government is in a continual state of massive expansion. Except we refuse to use money where we really need it at the border, protecting our own people. Now let me make this get something straight. My understanding is the omnibus budget was signed under a declaration of a COVID national emergency.
where the president has 120 additional powers. So technically, my understanding is that any of those dollars could be changed away from where we sent to. And let's talk about that money going to Border Patrol. Is it more clerical? Because all I hear is that they want to speed up the number of people coming into this country. Remember that when $5 billion for a wall was just too much to stomach for the Democrats? Unless we fix policies at the bird's eye level, ending generous parole and asylum, finishing the wall and kicking people out immediately, not giving them a court date, they will never show up to. These two brave individuals and everyone who works for them will continue to be overwhelmed. Chief Molden, do barriers work?
I'm sorry, sir, could you repeat that?
Do barriers work?
Sir, so thanks for the question. What I will tell you is that there's no one solution to solving the border, as you know, or securing the border. There is a combination of personnel, technology, infrastructure. In terms of the border wall system, certainly we have a significant amount of it in Tucson sector. I think an effective example of this is on the Tohono O'odham Nation. There is no border wall south of that, no border wall system, just simply a what we call vehicle barrier that basically prevents vehicles from driving through. And in the years before it existed, about 20% of our traffic came through the Tohono O'odham Nation. In recent years, after the border wall system, about 50% of the traffic comes through the Tohono O'odham Nation.
There's different reasons for that, though, right?
Well, yes, sir, because there is border wall system and improved infrastructure east and west of the nation.
So it's like funneling people through that.
Yes, sir.
So I'll go somewhere else. Under the current situation, would it be possible for foreign intelligence assets to penetrate the United States' interior?
Thanks again for the question, sir. So to speculate who could possibly be in the gotaways or the unknowns that we know would just simply be speculation. All I can tell you is that it is a tremendous concern that anyone goes through the border undetected, but the reality is we know there are people that are getting by.
Would you agree, Chief Chavez?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. And just to add on the barrier question and the value of those barriers, I would have to agree as well with Chief Modlin, because it is a tool in the toolbox for Border Patrol agents to have barriers in very strategic locations. Not all locations, because it will help us manage the flow of migrants coming into certain locations, especially vehicle traffic, because there are roads that connect to Mexico and the U.S. currently, so those are effective tools in the toolbox, just like technology is, just like roads and lights and other types of things that we use so that we are more effective in managing flow.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Norton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My friends on the other side often demonize migrants who are attempting to cross the southern border. They call it an invasion. I don't think such rhetoric is worthy of members of Congress. But as a result of this extreme rhetoric, faith-based organizations that support asylees and refugees fleeing violence and persecution have reported receiving heightened threats and attacks. All this rhetoric does is fan the flames. Migrants are increasingly dehumanized as a direct result of Republican xenophobic rhetoric. In 2019, a far-right anti-immigrant extremist murdered 23 people, most of them Latino, at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. Perhaps we all remember that. According to his so-called manifesto, his murderous spree was motivated by his belief that there was what he called a Hispanic invasion of people coming to the United States illegally. Chief Molden, does hateful rhetoric, xenophobia, or racism have any place in the Border Patrol?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. I would say absolutely not. I think hearings like this are a great way to get the facts out there. And certainly there is no place for hate within the Border Patrol. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for that answer. Chief Chavez, how does extreme rhetoric, including the rhetoric used by lawmakers, make your work and that of agents more challenging?
Thank you, ma'am, for the question. I think when I'm out there with our agents and we focus on the mission and we do the job that we do every day, encountering the migrants on the ground, the relationship that exists between those agents and encountering those migrants, it's one of those relationships that no one will ever understand, because those migrants, they see that agent for the first time, many of them on their journey. This is the first time they get the assistance and the help that they need from a law enforcement officer, from days and weeks, maybe even months on a long journey. So they're very helpful. They're very happy to have seen that agent for the first time. So a lot of times for us, I always talk to the agents about not worrying about the rhetoric or the things that they hear out there, about anything that they may see that's negative. Just focus on your mission. Focus on treating people with dignity and respect that they deserve, like any other human being. And always be professional and keep that standard, right? One of the things that we always strive on, especially in the RGV, where we have these large central processing centers, is that we do our very best to keep migrants healthy, keep them safe, keep them fed, and keep them clean. That's our number one priority, because they're only with us for a few hours. We are only a CBP temporary holding facility. We are not long-term detention. So that is our number one priority always.
Well, I certainly appreciate what you are doing to assure these migrants. But Chief Chavez, what can we in Congress do to ensure that we are working toward real and meaningful solutions to strengthen our immigration system?
Ma'am, thank you so much for the question. I have served now 27 years in this outfit, and I remember when I started, it was the 104th session with Congress. We are now at the 118th session, and here still talking, we're talking about immigration, we're still talking about border security. I think that we need to really just embrace change and good change, so that we reform our immigration laws. We really need to have that balance between immigration and border security and get serious about that. And we seriously need to find a solution, because we're Border Patrol agents. We are the ones that enforce policy, your policy that Congress puts out. We are there to secure that border. We care about the American people. We care about our country. And our Border Patrol agents work very hard every day between those ports of entry to secure this country. And I'm just so very proud. I think that as we continue to move forward, I always ask, whenever Congress is ready to put that team together, look at Border Patrol agents to come in and advise you, because I think there's many of them out there already with experience that know how to help out in building that path forward, because I think it's time. If not, otherwise, if we don't have the right policies or consequences, the world is watching us, and we're going to continue to see these large migration flows from around the world entering here at our southern border. Thank you, ma'am, for the question.
Gentlelady's time's expired. I feel compelled to state the fact that I believe my Democrat friends are confusing real oversight with fanning flames. Conducting oversight allows us to gather facts to solve problems, not fan flames. Chair recognizes Ms. Mace for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. I want to thank Ranking Member Raskin for this hearing today. In Charleston, South Carolina, we have the Border Patrol Training Academy, so I appreciate your efforts to be here today. I've been to the border, and to say it's eye-opening would be an understatement. I think if most Americans could see what's going on there, they would be shocked and stunned. I want to express my disappointment today with the actions of the Department of Homeland Security. The administration initially tried to block our Border Patrol chiefs from appearing before our Oversight Committee hearing today. DHS was literally trying to obstruct oversight, Mr. Chairman, and that's wrong. So I'm grateful for your leadership today, but also begs the question why the administration would not want you both to testify. As we all know, our Border Patrol chiefs, you guys are on the front lines of the border crisis, and we need to hear from you. The American people need to hear from you. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time the administration or DHS has tried to undermine the truth of what's really happening at the border. Secretary Mayorkas used the now debunked border agent whipping incident to label our Border Patrol agents as racist. I can only imagine how that further tanked morale. Secretary Mayorkas' response to a question of whether or not there was a crisis at the border just last year in November, he said, "We're seeing a significant challenge." When you see over 5 million illegal immigrants come across our border, that's not a challenge. That is a crisis. And we're unwilling, it seems like, to admit that crisis is happening. So after 2 years of gaslighting, obstruction, stonewalling, and lies, we're finally able to hear straight from the source. So I want to thank Chief Modlin and Chief Chavez for being here this morning. I have 3 questions, really, that I want to get to, and I have about 3 minutes left, so not a lot of time, if you'll bear with me. I'm kind of curious about your testimony, your joint testimony today. The funding, you mentioned a couple of different ways that the Border Patrol could be supported, but the funding to construct a border wall was missing from your testimony. Why is that? Either of you can answer.
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. As I said, the Border Patrol would certainly appreciate any increases in funding.
But it was missing from your testimony. And so you both have said today that barriers, walls, whatever we want to call it or nuance it, is needed. So why was it missing from your testimony?
Ma'am, I believe what I testified to was that we would appreciate any increase in personnel, technology,
Did someone
and
from
infrastructure.
DHS tell y'all to remove it from your written testimony that was submitted to oversight? Was there discussion about the wall? Was it going to be in there and then it was taken out? Why was it missing? If it's so needed, and you're saying it in your oral arguments today, and I appreciate it. This is not a gotcha, but it is important. I've been down to the border. I've seen it. Agents, I believe there's a great need to have certain barriers, but why was it missing?
Ma'am, earlier I testified to the effectiveness of it. I was not asked to remove anything about border wall system from my testimony.
Okay. And I do appreciate your comments, because I know that Chief Chavez, you said back in 2019, your testimony, and to the former president, that we need a border barrier. Both of you, in your testimony today, Tohono O'odham Nation, you said, Chief Modlin, that barriers in certain locations are certainly helpful. I would just appreciate in testimony in the future that we have a real conversation, that it's in the written testimony, because it is so important, and many of us know that. Chief Modlin, you mentioned both personnel and technology being needed for the Border Patrol. The hiring process for Border Patrol agents can last over a year, almost a year and a half sometimes. So what are some of the bureaucratic barriers to getting more agents into the Border Patrol?
Thanks again, ma'am. So I would say, one, that is certainly not my area of expertise, but I do know we have worked very hard to narrow that down. When I came in, it was probably closer to 2 years to get into the Border Patrol.
Wow.
I do think there are some things that can be worked on, such as the ability to pass people that already have a background check, say they're in DOD and they've already had a clearance, to have that slide over into the Border Patrol and then not eat up time doing things like that. I also know our academy has narrowed down significantly, and I believe our attrition at the academy is down from 35% to about 10%. So agency-wide, we've recognized we need more people.
How many agents roughly do you guys think the Border Patrol needs right now across?
So the Border Patrol is at about 19,300 or so. Yes, ma'am.
How many more do you need? I mean, or what's the staffing shortage number roughly?
So I think a reasonable amount of agents for the Border Patrol would be about 22,000. But again, that would be a headquarters determination, not mine. I certainly know I don't have enough agents within Tucson sector to deal with the flow that we're dealing with.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Kinley yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to just thank you both for being here as well. I'm proud to be a part of a small group of immigrants in the Congress, and I believe the only immigrant today that's asking questions, and certainly that is here. I immigrated as a young kid from South America to the United States with my family, my mom, my dad, grandmother, and like most immigrants, we came to the United States in search of the American dream in trying to improve what was a very difficult life back home. I always tell people that my proudest day was the day I became a United States citizen. I was in my early 20s. I was just wrapping up college. And I think like most immigrants that we meet, immigrants are actually incredibly patriotic. We love this country. I'm so grateful to be an American and to be here with you today. Immigrants, I think we recognize, have worked really hard to build this country. This is a country of immigrants, and a huge part of our success is due to immigrant labor and immigrants investing back into communities. I think also we understand, and I certainly attest to this, that immigrants are also some of the most patriotic people that you'll ever meet. They love this country, and they're very grateful to be here. We know that being anti-immigrant is really being anti-American. And we should be clear today at this hearing that no human is illegal. I think, unfortunately, we have heard from former leaders, even the former president, President Trump, calling immigrants, and particularly those from Mexico, rapists and drug dealers, and other very derogatory terms. That is not a way to solve this problem. I've heard today a lot of conversation about fentanyl and drugs coming over the border. And one argument that I've heard is this false connection between asylum seekers and immigrants and the very serious fentanyl crisis that we actually is serious in our country and in our community. Now, Chief Motlin, you've made aware some of your comments earlier, but I want to note that the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office has found that over 90% of fentanyl border seizures actually occur at legal border crossings, and that 91% of drug seizures are actually from U.S. citizens. Now, this same study found that only 4% was from potentially removable immigrants. The percentage of all those arrested at Border Patrol who possess any fentanyl, according to the conservative institute, the Cato Institute, is actually 0.02%. And so the truth is that a vast majority of fentanyl is being smuggled by U.S. citizens at legal ports of entry. And I think many of my colleagues have brought this up and have alluded to this data earlier today. And so I just think it's clear, and it's clear to me from both of you, that you also understand that there is suffering that is happening from people that are desperate along our border. And when asylum seekers are fleeing these repressive regimes, whether it's in Venezuela, whether it's in my home country of Peru, whether it's from Cuba, they are presenting themselves to the Border Patrol to make legal claim for asylum. These are mostly not traffickers. And so I think it's important to us to think about the people that we're talking about today as human beings, as people, as generally folks that are suffering and that are coming to our country for assistance and for help. It's also been interesting to me that many of our colleagues today who claim to be concerned about this issue voted against a bill which included $430 million for custom and border protection to modernize and improve screening at our ports of entry. This, of course, was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So this hearing is leaving me with a feeling that, like much in our immigration debate, we don't really have any interest, particularly with my friends on the other side, in actually solving this problem and making our country safer. I want to remind us that the last president to sign real comprehensive immigration reform was President Reagan, a Republican. His leadership back in the 1980s is what put my family and myself on a pathway to citizenship. And so I hope that today's Republican Party and today's leaders within the party are willing to come to the table and actually pass comprehensive and important immigration reform that not only continues to invest in our border and ensure that the asylum process is fair, but that also provides pathways and looks and goes to the root problem as to why folks are actually crossing the border. Because as we are clear from this hearing, it's not a drug issue or solely an issue about fentanyl. It's about desperation, and it's about access to the American dream. So I just want to thank you both for being here today. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Palmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Modeling, I want to run through some things quickly. I'd appreciate yes or no answer. When we talk about processing people who illegally cross the border, would you agree that a significant portion of those people are ultimately processed for release from DHS custody?
Thanks for the question, sir. I would
yes or
say,
no?
yes, that a significant amount of the people are released from our custody.
The fact is, there's over 1 million were released in the United States from DHS custody just in fiscal year 2022. These individuals are released with a notice to appear in immigration court at a later date. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So many people are released with a notice
Okay.
to appear.
Are you aware that the immigration court backlog nationwide is now over 2 million cases?
So that is not within our purview. I am unaware of.
Just for informational purposes, as of the end of December of 22, it was 2,056,328 cases pending in immigration courts nationwide. The average number of days, and this is the average, for a hearing is 771. That's over 2 years. So people who are coming in here illegally are released from custody to appear in an immigration court, and even assuming they actually show up for the court hearing, make any case that they have, and finalize all appeals and other processes available to them, we're talking about years living in the United States before there's ever even a possibility of a removal order. And that's just if they follow the rules. Chief Modlin, would you agree at a very basic level that a higher likelihood of release from custody increases the incentive for people who have come here illegally compared to a scenario where someone would be detained or removed if they were illegally across the border? Would that increase the number of people who would remain here?
Sir, thanks again for the question. What I would say is exactly what I was getting to earlier, is that I think when we talk about the border and border security, we have to recognize it's much bigger than the Border Patrol. We are the first 24 to 72 hours that someone experiences. Everything that you are talking about is much further down. So when we look at, how to solve border security issues, we really have to look at more immigration judges, more CIS personnel, more ERO bed space, so that we don't have the releases into the communities, and then we don't have these 2-year waits, sir.
Well,
but that's all far beyond my
just
purview.
increasing the speed and efficiency and the volume for release from custody, that's just a stopgap measure. That doesn't really stop the flow. I mean, until you're actually removing people, there's really no incentive for anybody to even show up. I find it interesting that my colleagues are just sold out completely for an open border. I understand the need for families to find a better quality of life, but there needs to be a process, an orderly, organized process. And that's not what's happening. When my colleagues, they want to avoid the issue of the danger to national security. They want to avoid the issue of the fact that there were over 107,000 people who died from drug overdoses, and that's probably underreported by 15 to 20%, based on what some of the coroners have said. The number of people who don't want it on the death certificate that their loved one died from a drug overdose. Fentanyl is a weapon that's coming across our borders that's killing young people at a record level. The drug overdose death rate for people under age 24 is at an all-time high, especially among the African-American community. So what I have a real hard time understanding why we continue to operate the way we operate, and the questions I'm asking are about the people that you picked up, not the ones who got away. And you don't even know how many gotaways they are, because those are only the ones that you saw. So, Mr. Chairman, I sit here and listen to some of the questions from my colleagues, and many of them voted to not condemn socialism. And I just wonder what the real agenda is here for an open border. Crap, we can't even keep a balloon from crossing their border, and we don't do anything about it till it's about to leave. It kind of sounds like our border policy across the board. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Representative Frost.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, before I start, earlier, I believe I heard Mr. Gosar say something about President Biden's immigration policies being more Big Brother, more control, and more changing our culture. I just want a clarification. Is that what Mr. Gosar said? Okay. Changing our culture. I understand what he's trying to say, but I believe that immigrants are American and thus a part of American culture. You know, it's unfortunate that this hearing started off with a ton of hyperbole and posturing, saying that President Biden and his administration have created the worst border crisis in American history. That isn't about oversight. It's about stoking the fears of immigrants and those seeking asylum. And it's something I take personally as a son of a Cuban refugee. Look, for many folks around the country who might only watch far-right media or just listen to even some of the folks on this committee, I'm curious, Chief Chavez, when President Biden took office, did your agents stop enforcing the border and just allow everybody to come in, thus creating what we hear here is an open border? Did that happen when the president took office?
Sir, thank you for your question. The answer is no, sir.
Okay,
We
thank you.
continue to enforce policy and laws.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Chief Modlin, when President Biden took office, did the border just open and did y'all stop enforcing your policies?
Also, thank you for your question, sir. I can tell you this is the 5th administration I've worked for, starting with the Clinton administration, and Border Patrol agents do their job every day.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Look, as y'all probably realize by now, a lot of these hearings are not really about solutions. They're about politics. And for me, I believe solutions must be rooted in facts. I know y'all probably watch the news and are aware of what's going on politically. Would you agree that the narrative being peddled right now that says that an insane amount of fentanyl is being brought into this country by illegal immigrants specifically, would you say that is true?
Sir, again, we're here to report on the facts on border security. I probably defer from giving an opinion on anything in the news right now.
With the data, right?
Because that's probably doubtful. I can't provide
No, all
a
good. Thank
factual
you, Chief.
statement.
No, I appreciate it. I agree, right? It has to be rooted in the data. You know, a Cato Institute report and CBP data shows that more than 85% of the illicit fentanyl entering the United States is brought in by citizens of the United States of America. So, Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record the 2022 Cato Institute report demonstrating that illicit fentanyl is primarily trafficked by U.S. citizens at lawful ports of entry.
Without objection.
Thank you. Look, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would have us believe that the solution to the fentanyl problem in this country is to discourage both illegal and legal immigration. In comes the wall, which we've heard a lot about. You know, we know that crossings haven't decreased since we spent $15 billion, once again, $15 billion with a B, of taxpayer money on that monument of fear. The wall kind of reminds me of a sad, decaying Soviet statue. Is the bigger failure that migrants are able to breach the wall or find their way around it? Chief Modlin.
Thank you for the question, sir. One thing I would say, I think it's worth pointing out, especially Mr. Garcia just came back in the room. I'm glad you did. You talked about being an immigrant and being proud of the country. I can tell you a week ago, I was in San Diego, drove past the Scottish Rite Center, and the agent next to me said, I smile every time I see that building. And I said, why? He said, because I was born in Tijuana. And that's the place where I naturalized and became a U.S. citizen. And so I do hope, you know, when you all make it down to the border, you talk to the Border Patrol agents and recognize that a great number of them are immigrants to the country as well, or first generations like yourself, Mr. Frost.
And Chief, on that story, so the senator who's naturalized in was across the border and something he saw from Mexico. So it was like a beacon of hope.
Well, this was pretty significantly into San Diego, but he grew up on the border, you know, Tijuana. You can certainly see across the border.
And he saw it as a beacon of hope.
And his family recognized opportunity in the United States.
Being able to see directly in our country,
Yes, sir. Yes.
That's amazing. That's a great story to hear. You know, for 2 years of campaigning, we've heard about the border, the border, the border. And here we are, and yet we're not being solutions-oriented. It's hyperbole and lies. And I want to be clear, and we've heard this time and again, and I'll say it again. The situation deserves this committee's attention, because there is a crisis at the border. But the crisis is not a criminal one. It's a humanitarian one. And it's an important fact to keep in mind. I appreciate y'all's work, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Fallon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just stated that the walls don't work, and yet there's one going up right on the Capitol right now against our recommendation. So, that's interesting. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to thank the chiefs for coming and joining us today. We're on a tight time schedule, so Chiefs, if I interrupt you at all, it's only because I'm trying to make your time as efficient as possible. Now, I fully understand the realities at the border and the concerns of retaliation that you may have by some administration officials if what you say here angers those in power, so even if it's truthful. So having said that, all I'm going to ask you to do is to provide factual information and answers. Sound fair? That's all I want. Chief Chavez, would you describe the current situation in present conditions at the southern border as either good or bad? Simple.
I would describe it a bit overwhelming.
Overwhelming, so a synonym for bad. I would actually probably add terrible. So let me ask it another way. How long has Customs and Border Patrol been keeping and publishing records of illegal crossings on a monthly basis? Roughly. About 20 years?
On a monthly basis, well, I've been in 27 years. I've probably been seeing them for about 25 years.
Yeah, I think it's about that. So what's the worst month in recorded history for illegal crossings? And when I say worst, like the highest number?
In my 27-year career, I'd have to look Congress.
I think it's actually it's last month, which was December. It was 251,487. It was the worst month ever in over almost a quarter century. That's the very definition of bad and terrible. But before December, were you aware of the worst month before December? And we're talking about almost a quarter of a century. The worst month, do you know? Offhand, if you don't, I know.
I can't think right now of the worst month.
It's also 2022.
Okay.
It was in May, and it was 241,136 crossings. And before May, it was the very previous month of April, which was 235,785 illegal crossings. So prior to the Biden administration, Chiefs, and either of you, are you aware of any month we ever had that was over 200,000? Either? No?
I'm unaware, sir.
No, sir.
Because it had never happened before. And yet, the last 10 months in a row have been over 200,000 illegal crossings. So that's astonishing. And in fact, it's safe to say that what's going on the southern border is tough, it's trying, and it's terrible. And there's a glaring difference between this administration and the past. And one of the policies was the Wait in Mexico policy, where we said, your asylum case will be adjudicated while you wait in Mexico. Would you not agree, Chief Chavez, that effective policies such as the migrant protection protocols are vital to deterring illegal immigration at the border?
During my time in El Paso, we had the migrant protection protocols, and they were effective during the years that I was a chief in El Paso.
So they were effective.
It helped manage capacity at the facility.
Chief Marlin, do you believe the Mexican drug cartels present a clear and present danger to the safety and security of the United States?
Thanks for the question, sir. I would say that the drug cartels and their control of the border just south of our border is a very significant problem.
So I've seen estimates, and would you agree that's about their income is about $25 billion a year just with the illegal narcotics trafficking? Does that sound about right?
Yes, sir. I've seen those same figures.
And then not to mention the $13 billion that they're now making with human smuggling because of all the folks that are coming in and the tax that they charge those people. So $38 billion when you combine those. That's the size of some nation states' entire GDP in a given year. So the cartels are dangerous and they're deadly and they're murderers. They're absolute worst of the worst.
Yeah, I think
and you see it on the front lines, both of you. So as someone, if someone's committed and they take a constitutional oath to preserve, protect, and defend the United States and the safety of the citizens, doesn't it stand to reason that we should do everything within our lawful power to secure the border?
Sir, yes. So I took an oath to protect the United States. I take that very seriously. What I can tell you, I think it's very important that you brought up about the amount of money the cartels have. So these organizations, it's almost limitless, the funds they have. They don't have to follow policy. They don't have to follow law. They don't recognize the international border. They don't recognize state borders. So, where we are, of course, confined by all those things or restricted by those things, they have absolute freedom in terms.
And absolute freedom, and I apologize to cut you off, but to smuggle in fentanyl, which I think we'd all agree is the most dangerous drug they're currently trafficking in, where something smaller than a tip of a pencil, 2 milligrams, can kill a human being. They smuggled in, and they've 24,000 pounds in the last 2 fiscal years. And they have killed 80,000 Americans in just 1 year. That is asymmetrical warfare being waged on the United States. And what we don't lack is your will to secure the border, the Border Patrol agents' will. We have the resources, we have the manpower, we have the technology. What we lack, Mr. Chairman, is Alejandro Mayorkas' will and Joe Biden's will to do so. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Ballot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take a moment to acknowledge who live on farm are migrant workers. Migrant workers are an integral, critical part of Vermont's agricultural sector, and it's not unique to Vermont. Immigrant farm workers make up an estimated 73% of ag workers in the U.S. So immigrants and migrant farm workers literally put food on our tables across this country. And because these issues are also about the economy, immigration policy is complex. And it can't be just about enforcement policy alone. And which is why President Biden understands this and understands that migration from South and Central America also follows deep-rooted political and social violence, environmental issues, environmental disasters, and economic instability. And he's addressing these issues head on. In June, President Biden hosted the Summit of Americas to approach immigration with a comprehensive and collaborative framework. The result was the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, an agreement between 21 countries in North, Central, and South America to promote stability and humane pathways for migration. So asylum is a human right. Immigration and migration are critical to our agricultural sector. We must remain a place of refuge. We must work to keep migrants and refugees safe. So my question to you, Chief Chavez, you've had a long career with Border Patrol. Chief Chavez, has there been a time when working well with your Mexican counterparts has helped keep migrants safe? And if so, could you please tell us about that time?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. So in my time in the Border Patrol, I have had opportunities to work not only at the local level, sector level, but also here at headquarters on different types of programs like repatriation agreements, where we sit down and identify different steps along the process for repatriation, not only at the national level, but local repatriation agreements where migrants will not be returned to a foreign country during the nighttime hours. It'll only be during daytime under certain conditions or certain regulations. And I think that it's important that we as an enforcement agency on the border between the ports of entry, that we're able to come to those agreements with foreign governments, because these are human beings that we treat each and every day, and that we ensure as an enforcement agency that when we do encounter these migrants, whether they're children that are unaccompanied, whether they're families, whether they're single adults, that we treat them with dignity and respect that they deserve, and that we keep them safe, that we keep them clean, that we keep them healthy, and that we give them an opportunity to bathe, because many of them haven't bathed for days or even weeks, depending on how long their journey has been. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Panama. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be and to see the Colombian and Panamanian border, because we had seen that and heard that there was a lot of different types of populations coming through there, coming through the Darien jungle up to the southern border of Mexico and then the United States. And to understand that journey and to be able to understand the complexity of the journey and the needs of these people. One of the things that we're very proud of in the Border Patrol is the ability to have those partnerships with Mexico right now and be able to understand that not only do they manage the flow on their side of the border as it relates to migrants, but also with us on the northern border, on our side, because together we're able to have a more better understanding on how to better care for the migrants themselves.
Thank you, Chief. I hear you saying that we need dignity, we need compassion, we need to see them as human beings first. Thank you.
Yes.
I yield back.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Donalds for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Chief Modlin, Chief Chavez. Thank you for being here. We're going to go really fast, a lot of stuff to cover. Going back for the past 12 years, border encounters, 2010, 447,000, 2011, 327,000, 2012, 356,000, 2013, 414,000. 2015, 331,000, 16, 408,000, 17, 303,000, 18, 396,000, 2019, 851,000, 2020, 400,000, 2021, 1.6 million, 2022, 2.2 million. There was somebody who became president of the United States in January of 21. And on January 20, 2021, this gentleman actually got rid of the Migrant Protection Protocols, the MPP program. He stopped border wall funding. He actually gutted the interior enforcement against illegal aliens. He put a 100-day moratorium to study border security protocols. In your opinions, you've done this job, both of you, for quite some time, and we thank you for your service. But in your opinion, do you believe these policy changes actually led to the drastic increases in border encounters at the southern border?
Thank you, sir, for the question, and I will try to go fast. What I can tell you in 27 years is that migration is very complicated. There are push and pull factors. The thing I can tell you that goes to the spike that you're talking about is in the Tucson sector, interviewing people post-arrest, what became the most common response was that they believed that when the administration changed, that the law changed and policy changed and that there was an open border.
Chief, I'm glad you said that because, ladies and gentlemen, the law did not change. Joe Biden decided not to follow the law. I've actually been, Chief Chavez, I've been in your section. I was that member that went to that bus that's run by HHS that was taking migrant children out of your holding facilities, and they were taking them to unmarked hotels somewhere along the southern border, which, by the way, is a no-bid contract to some for-profit company from the Department of Homeland of HHS to some for-profit company. What we see in the Yuma section are the drug cartels get fake IDs for the migrants that they are trafficking through our southern border, and they tell the migrants to drop the fake IDs before they meet up with our border agents. Chief Chavez, why would the drug cartels tell the migrants they are trafficking to drop their IDs before they engage our agents?
Because they do that so that way there's no identification on them and that we're not able to identify them, and they can be who they are, whoever they want to be at the time that we identify them at processing.
Chief Chavez, got a second question for you. When I was in, not your section, I was in Yuma section, one of the things that we found were empty capsules of Plan B, empty capsules of birth control. It's been said in this hearing that this is not a criminal process or a criminal issue. This is a humanitarian issue. Are there young girls who are being raped in the journey to the southern border?
There are cases where we have debriefed many of the young ladies, migrants that have come into our custody at our central processing centers that have said that they've been abused.
So we have young girls who are being raped in the journey to our southern border to be trafficked into the United States. We know the drug cartels charge anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 per person to come into the southern border. And we know that starting January 20, 2021, we had a four-fold increase in encounters with border agents. Chief Modlin, Chief Chavez, do you think the criteria of policy shifts have created a larger humanitarian crisis where young girls are now raped by smugglers or by the drug cartel in the path to our southern border?
Sir, thanks for the question. What I can tell you is, in my experience, there has always been violence against migrants as they make these trips. I don't know that I could say that a policy has increased the violence against the migrants making that trip to the United States.
Well, I got 20 seconds, so I'm going to reclaim. That's not against you. I would argue that if you have wholesale policy changes, which lead to a fourfold increase in encounters, what you also are doing is having a fourfold increase in sexual assaults of young girls going to our southern border. Quick point, Mr. Chairman, it was said earlier about the last piece of immigration reform done by Congress was by Ronald Reagan and the Congress at that time in 1986. That was the last time it was done. Here are the facts of what actually happened. Ronald Reagan, in good faith, signed a comprehensive immigration reform plan. And part of that plan was enhanced border security and border wall funding. And congressional Democrats did not continue with the funding apparatuses in future budgets. So they reneged on their side of the deal, which is why a lot of Republicans today don't want to do comprehensive immigration reform. We want to see the border secured consistently. And then at that point, we can go through the different pieces of immigration policy so we can have a full and complete immigration system to make sure America succeeds in the future. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony. Customs and Border Patrol plays an important role in our national security, and we appreciate that fentanyl and other threats to our country are being addressed. But fentanyl can't be a ubiquitous factor in discussing immigration. So when we say immigrant, different images come to mind for different people. So let's try vulnerable mothers, teenage sons, fathers with their daughters. These are people who are traveling to our southwest border for a host of reasons. Both domestic and international law establish the right to seek safety from governmental prosecution, protection from violence based on gender, ethnicity, or religion, relief from economic instability and poverty, and to escape other catastrophic events. To be clear, irregular migration is not a new phenomenon. We've seen this throughout my lifetime, all of our lifetimes, quite before. But I will remind that the previous administration greatly harmed the lives of migrants while complicating the lives of CBP. There was a Muslim ban. Legal migration was cut, blocking highly skilled migrants from important jobs. Asylum seekers were forced to live in encampments to await court hearings in a wall. We all, in every branch of government, have more work to do to address our immigration system. But there are some clear next steps that we can and must take. We must fund more skilled judges to address the backlog. We must end Title 42. This Trump-era policy will only exacerbate the chaos at the border, and it must be ended. We can address the root causes of migration, help our neighbors. The point is, we must do more. The lives of those mothers and those sons and those daughters and those fathers, future Americans and our global citizens and siblings are relying on us. So with that said, Chief Chavez, what did that coordination with local officials and NGOs look like, and what kind of help was provided to immigrants?
So the coordination in El Paso, specifically El Paso and then RGV, just quickly, was daily. And I think the coordination was very important, especially because today I think our number one goal in a situation at the border that can become very overwhelming very quickly, you need their support. You need local officials, you need other partners from other agencies at the federal, state, and local level to assist you, where they can also participate in providing holding, transport, and they can assist you. Operation Stone Garden is a phenomenal program that's available to provide us support on border security, to see the Sheriff's Department provide us assistance with transport of migrants from one point to the other than just transport. No type of immigration type nexus, just transport support is phenomenal for us. But on the coordination with NGOs is critical. It is something that the Border Patrol has truly evolved over the years, because now we're working with shelters directly with the assistance also of ICE enforcement and removal operations at the table, because they are the long-term detention as well that can also assist us in the liaison with NGOs, faith-based organizations, so that they also have the opportunity to provide shelters for families and also single adults that are amenable to release. In many situations, CBP temporary holding facilities, in situations where we're with high holding, that we need to release some of these people through ICRO, a lot of times we have to lean on these NGOs because we can't hold them very long at our facility. So the regular meetings, the regular communication, the group texting, the group emails were a daily communication. Today in RGV, where I sit, we have a daily report that now I send to every group stakeholder in that region so that they know our activity levels of the flow of migration coming into my region. They get to see it just like my people see within the organization. How many type of Mexican nationals crossed yesterday? How many Nicaraguan Mexican nationals came across? How many Honduran? They know the top 3 types of nationalities. So it's important for me that our stakeholders have the same situational awareness that I do on the type of populations coming across that border.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Mautland, understanding that many migrants are actually asylum seekers fleeing governmental prosecution or persecution, protection from violence based on gender, ethnicity, or religion. What is your agency doing to help distinguish these people from the narrative of an invasion at the border?
Thanks for the question, ma'am. So a few things. One, asylum seekers are fairly rare in the Tucson sector. About 87% of what we see are not people that do not claim fear. I will tell you that certainly the Border Patrol and myself, we recognize the law, and the law states that any migrant that's in the United States, regardless of status, has the right to apply for asylum. I would also say it's important to recognize that the Border Patrol doesn't grant or deny any sort of relief or benefit to anyone. We simply encounter the person. If they do make a claim of fear, then they're put in a different pathway than someone that doesn't make a claim of fear. But ultimately, again, as I've stated many times, that's far beyond what the Border Patrol does.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Armstrong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think some of these things are new. When methamphetamine first started becoming a problem in the Midwest, it was primarily made locally. It was made in fish houses in Minnesota, in abandoned cabins in rural North Dakota, and local law enforcement actually did an incredibly good job of shutting it down. But in the law of unintended consequences, the cartels got significantly involved in methamphetamine and began trafficking it across the southern border, and it ended up in places like North Dakota and Minnesota and Chicago and every community all across the country. I just have one question, because we have a ton of law enforcement. Well, I have a bunch more questions, but I have one right now. Law enforcement experience at that table. In your professional judgment, is the percentage of drugs seized by law enforcement higher at ports of entry or higher between ports of entry? Ms. Chavez. Chief Chavez. Which one's it harder to get drugs across?
I would have to say, in my experience, harder to get across.
Yeah.
It would probably be the ports of entry.
Thank you. Chief Maudlin?
Thanks for the question, sir. Generally speaking, I would say that is probably correct when you look at how hardened some of the ports are, the technology. However, I would say, too, there are some ports that are in very rural areas that may be easier than
we have lots of them in North Dakota.
Yes, sir.
We're going to get to that in a second. Who makes the fentanyl? Chief
Sir,
Chavez. Go ahead, Chief Maudlin.
Yes, sir. As you described, my understanding is equal to yours, that in the beginning, I'm sorry, fentanyl, my head was still on meth.
Who's making the fentanyl?
So the fentanyl is being produced, my understanding, in Mexico.
Okay. Chief Chavez?
Same briefings from our intelligence folks that it's a Mexico product.
So if it's being made in Mexico, I'm assuming it's being made by the cartels.
Correct, sir.
So regardless of who's bringing it across the border, U.S. citizens, ports of entry, between ports of entry, not ports of entry, the drugs that are killing people in my communities are being made by the cartels.
That is correct, sir.
Chief Maudlin, you testified earlier that nobody's crossing the southern border in your district, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is what you said, without interacting with the cartels.
That is 100% correct, sir.
So the cartels are involved in the manufacture and trafficking of methamphetamine.
Yes, sir.
And they are involved in trafficking anybody who's trying to come across the southern border.
That's correct, sir.
So one of the things I'm having a hard time getting my head around is we skip that part. If there's a 12-year-old girl that's come from southern Mexico, Honduras, wherever, hasn't had a drink of water, you were talking about bathing, gets to the southern border, I don't think there's anybody that doesn't want to give her a blanket and a hug. Like, that is part of being a human being, that is part of compassion, that is part we want. But what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are failing to recognize is in order to get there, they have to deal with a group of people that is not interested in human rights. They have no they place no value on humanity. If they can make money on it, they will exploit it. I think one of the mistakes we make quite often is we talk about them like they're drug cartels. They're in the business of making money. And whatever the path of least resistance is how they make money. So, Chief Chavez, I want to go back to you. In your sector, does anybody get to the border at this point without dealing with the cartels?
No, sir. They own the territory south of the border.
So the vulnerable mother deals with the cartels.
Correct.
The child deals with the cartels.
Correct.
Do they treat them well on these journeys?
No, sir.
Do they treat them well after they get here?
No, sir.
Are some of their family members enslaved, pressured, and do whatever in order to continue to pay them until they've worked off their fee?
They are. They're pretty much confined to whatever those cartels require in order to be able to see their family member again.
If you are a 14-year-old girl and you come to one of your stations and the cartels have threatened your mom, your dad, your family, your grandmother, any of those people, are they going to tell you the truth about what they have to do next?
Most of the time they will not, because they're afraid that their family may get hurt, or that they themselves will be injured or hurt.
So when we talk about the humanitarian crisis, and my friend Congressman Donalds went through these numbers, we are putting these people in the hands of cartels in their journey by our policies that we have set in the United States.
Many times these people, from the moment that they leave their front door at their point of origin, in the middle village down south somewhere, they're already starting their exploitation from that point on.
Yeah, the Northern Triangle countries have a tremendous amount
way
of
up to
gang
the border.
activity that is organized all the way through.
Correct.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman. Chair recognizes Mr. Kassar for 5 minutes.
Thank you. The Republicans on this committee keep trying to link immigrants to the opioid crisis, but the facts are clear. Immigrant families fleeing violence and poverty are not the source of the fentanyl crisis as they cross the border. So, Chief Chavez and Chief Maudlin, you run sectors of the Border Patrol. Do you know what percentage of those arrested by Border Patrol for unlawfully crossing the border, how many of them are found with fentanyl? Do you know that number, yes or no?
Sir, thank you for the question. I do not have that number.
I have the number from Border Patrol. It is 0.02%. That's less than 1/2 of 1/2 of 1%. That's so little, you couldn't see it on a typical graph if I had one behind me. But we do arrest others who do have fentanyl. More than 9 out of 10 people caught by Border Patrol trafficking it, or by Customs and Border Protection trafficking it and Border Patrol, are lawful U.S. residents. So I'll say that again. More than 9 out of 10 people caught are lawful U.S. residents. I was just in the El Paso sector last week with Border Patrol, and they confirmed this number because people driving narcotics across the border are citizens with passports who can get past the checkpoints. So the people trafficking fentanyl on the border are U.S. citizens. The people suffering and dying from overdoses in our communities are U.S. citizens. So why on earth are we talking about immigrants today? Because Republicans in this Congress want to drum up fear about poor people who are fleeing to this country and distract from the real issues of mental health, overdoses, and poverty. If we actually want to take on fentanyl overdoses, then let's call a hearing on successful addiction treatment programs. Let's call a hearing where we treat the opioid crisis as what it is, a public health emergency. We could have our first bipartisan and fully functional hearing in Congress here if we did that. But instead, we're hearing members on this committee calling refugees and asylees, quote, an invasion, and warning that immigrants coming here are President Biden trying to, quote, change our culture. The failed drug war, plus failed anti-immigrant policies that close any legal pathway to immigration, creates the underground market for cartels and criminal groups in the first place. You're not helping beat the cartels, you're setting up the market for them. You're not helping keep migrants safe. We're pushing folks to go have to work with criminal organizations to get here because there is no other legal pathway. No one should have to pay smugglers and brave the jungle and the desert and nights on top of a train to save their family. No one should have to sleep on the streets or risk violence, including sexual assault. In San Antonio last summer, I represent San Antonio and Austin, Texas. There were 53 people found dead in the back of a tractor trailer who were trying to come here for a better life. They should have just been able to apply and come here in an orderly and legal manner, but instead, grandmothers, mothers, fathers, kids as young as 13 years old were scorched to death in the heat and killed. If we want to help those folks, then we need comprehensive immigration reform. If we want to address the fentanyl crisis, then let's talk about helping our communities deal with addiction, mental health, poverty, income inequality, and instability. Let's have hearings on that. Let's have oversight about that. But let's not participate in this sham that tries to blame those problems on the poorest among us, because we have seen that all too often in this building, and we're going to push back on that. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Chair recognizes Mr. Perry for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman and thank Chief Modlin, Chief Chavez for your service to our country. Been listening to the dialogue today, and it probably seems confusing to many Americans who may be watching. Is this about people that can't get? By the way, can people come to this country legally? Chief, can you just answer that question? Because I just heard that they can't, but can they come to this country legally?
Yes, sir.
Oh, of course they can, right? They can come legally. So I've heard this. It's about people seeking a better life. We need more Border Patrol agents. We don't have the resources that we need. It's all very complicated. Well, it's not very complicated. In 2017, 300,000 plus people came across the border illegally. This is using CBP's total encounter number, 300,000. Border Patrol actually had more agents in 2017 than they have right now. But somehow, 310,000, FY18, 404,000. So it's up. But then suddenly in FY21, 1,660,000. And then the next year, FY22, breaks another record, 2,200,000. Chief Modlin, what changed? What happened?
Sir, thank you for the question. As I stated earlier, migration is incredibly
No, I get that, but what happened? What changed? Did the law change?
So, no, sir, absolutely nothing.
Did Border Patrol's resolve to secure our border change? What changed?
No, and I will say, I'm glad you brought that up. If there's one thing that is unchanged in my 27 years, it's the Border Patrol's resolve.
Yeah, we agree with that, and we applaud that and
from,
celebrate that.
Yeah.
But what changed? Something dramatically changed between FY20, when 400,000 encounters happened, and FY21, when 1,660,000 encounters, and then a record was broken again in 22 with 2.2 million. What changed?
So what I can tell you, sir, again, my experience in the Tucson sector, as that surge started and we did our post-arrest interviews of people that were in our custody, what we found was that the vast majority of them were saying that they believed when the administration changed that law and policy changed.
Why?
Why
did they believe that?
For the border. I can tell you, sir, again, based on my experience, all it takes is a few people to start talking about things like asylum. It's literally, it spreads.
Was there more wall, Chief? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but was there more border wall in 2021 than there was in 2020? Was there more border wall?
Yes, sir.
How much more?
I don't know, sir.
Minuscule or a lot? Hundreds of miles?
Yes, significant amounts.
Significant amount. But yet it still went up. So that didn't fix it. What changed? The law didn't change, did it? You didn't change, did you?
No, sir.
I know you don't want to say it, right? You can't say it.
No, sir. Respectfully, I did tell you exactly why. I'm aware.
You know why? You know that the migrants said that they thought the border was open.
Yes.
Right? Why did they think that?
They thought that, sir. I don't know. What they told us, was that they had heard it was open. So, and again, sir, in my experience, it only takes a few people to say the right words, and it travels. And certainly in this age where everyone has a smartphone, everyone's on social media, the message they get is obviously not always the correct message, and then they start migrating. And sometimes people migrate
So just based on rumor, we got 5 times more people coming across the border illegally, just based on rumor. Nothing else changed, just a rumor of people talking on their cell phones south of the border. Is that what you're telling me?
Sir, my experience was a lot of what they'd heard, they believed had changed. They believed law had changed. They believed
Let me just tell you what hasn't changed. The Border Patrol's mission, which is to protect the American people, I'm sure you know this, protect the American people, safeguard our borders, and enhance the nation's economic prosperity. It seems pretty simple to me. You know what I got? I got this poster behind me. You see that? That's the exhibit at the DEA Museum. Now, I live in Pennsylvania. I represent a state far away from the border. But there's a bunch of people in this picture from Pennsylvania. 5,000 people in Pennsylvania died from fentanyl coming across the border illegally. That changed. You know what else changed? The number of fentanyl deaths across the United States of America has gone up dramatically and incrementally at the same rate, proportionally, as people coming across the border illegally. You can make the correlation. Sir, what has changed is this administration's approach, not your fealty to your job and your love for your country. That hasn't changed. But what has changed is this administration's view and outlook on what should happen on the border. I apologize on behalf of the United States of America for putting you in a bad situation that you're in every single day and your members have to deal with every single day, dealing with this. Something this size, you know this, kills 330 Americans, something this size. And with all the rhetoric on the other side saying it's all coming through the ports of entry, how many of these can one of the gotaways carry? Do you know how many a gotaway can carry? How many of these?
Sir, generally speaking, when we see a migrant that is moving narcotics, it's usually a few kilos, maybe 3 or 4 kilos.
A whole bunch of these, right? A whole bunch of these.
Absolutely.
And how many of the gotaways do you know that were carrying fentanyl? How many do you know?
There is no.
You don't know, right? So this claim of 90% at the ports of entry is unknown compared to the gotaways because we don't know what they were carrying because they got away, right?
One environment, sir, the port of entry is a controlled environment. Right. Obviously, as you know, between the ports of entry is uncontrolled.
Thank you for your service. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Crockett for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for being here. I know it's a long day. I'm actually out of Texas, and so I'm a little familiar with border issues. But I first want to begin by making it clear that Democrat or Republican, I think that we all can agree that there is an issue in this country as it relates to drugs, period. And I also want to be clear for anyone that may not know, but all drugs come across all borders, to be perfectly honest. It's not just fentanyl, and that has been an issue for quite some time. We also know that fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, and we know that the opioid epidemic has been on the rise for quite some time. But I do want to make sure that I clarify a few things. This is what happens when you're at the end. You've got to clarify a few things. So number one, it's my understanding that the number for 2019 was 900,000 instead of the claim that the numbers somehow were on the rise, seemingly insinuating once President Biden was in office. But that 900,000 number that was crossing in 2019 was double what we had seen in the past decade. And in 2019, the president was still Trump. So I do want to do that, as well as I want to acknowledge the fact that in 2020, we know that COVID was happening, which was also complicating issues, and not every country had the same access to be able to survive COVID. We know that the United States was actually leading the world as it relates to trying to survive this once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and the rest of the world was following us. So for some people, it legitimately was life or death, and honestly, it typically is a life or death issue. I also want to ask you one quick question about the cartels. As someone who has had to deal with cartels in courtrooms before, we know that they are quite powerful. We know that they are also problematic. And it is my understanding that the cartels were continually spreading disinformation so that people would cross the border, because guess what? if there are more people crossing the border, does that not make it more difficult for y'all to spot the cartels in a big crowd versus if it's just a couple of people that are crossing over?
Thank you for your question, ma'am. So the cartels certainly have a capacity to overwhelm us with these groups that are crossing.
Absolutely.
You know, I would like to point just for a quick second, you know, you mentioned COVID, and obviously COVID has hit us hard in Tucson sector. You know, in the 2 years that I've been there, we lost 3 agents to COVID as well because, you know, as frontline employees, we can't work from home. We can't take a lot of the precautions that other people did, and dealing with populations that have come from all over the world and have crossed some of the sort of hottest spots on the globe for COVID, and we're housed south of the border with no PPE in these terrible conditions, and then crossed and contacted our agents, caused quite a bit of loss of life throughout CBP, but in my sector, 3 agents in the last 2 years.
Thank you for that, and I am sorry for your loss. Let me also point to another issue. I think that Haiti may have been mentioned at some point in time. I don't know if anyone pointed out that the president was killed July 7th, 2021 in Haiti, which also caused for a more dangerous situation for those that were living there and could have prompted people to want to cross the border. And I'm going to hit one other point, and then I've got another question to ask, and that's around there was an issue of jailing migrants and separating families under the Trump administration. Are you aware of that? That children were in cages?
Ma'am, thanks again for the question. One thing I can tell you about separation, you know, it's come up here a few times.
But let me just be real clear. Are you aware that there were people in cages, including children?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Well, moving on. The next question that I have then is, are you familiar with an Operation Lone Star out of the state of Texas?
We are familiar with that operation, ma'am.
Okay. So I sat on the committee in the Texas House that dealt with Operation Lone Star, where we had a number of hearings. Are you aware that the purpose was to make sure that we could go after those that were trafficking drugs, go after the cartel, those that were trafficking people, and make sure that we were keeping the border safe? But the only thing that we were finding is that the majority of our monies were being spent on basically asylum seekers, and we were not actually getting at the cartels and the bad folk that we were trying to keep out. I want to say close to 90% of the people that were being incarcerated for simple trespass, and they were just trying to seek asylum. Are you aware of that?
I am not aware of that.
Okay. Also, I don't know how much discussion there's been, but I know that this was always an issue, and it was about whether or not we were going to build a wall. You would agree with me that a wall is not going to keep bad people out, because when drug traffickers and cartel decide they're going to do something, the wall ain't going to do nothing.
Gentlelady's time's expired, but feel free to answer the question.
Well, we spoke earlier about barrier as being just one of the many tools that Border Patrol agents utilize to get the job done on the border. So I think that barrier is effective in certain strategic locations along the border to manage whatever may come, whether it's vehicles or people attempt to enter through certain locations there. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. It's a myth that the border control issue that it's just at the border. In Knox County, in my home state of Tennessee, 533 people have died in 2021 due to drug overdose. 463 of them, 87%, had fentanyl in their system. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to include the 2021 drug-related death report into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And Agent Malden, do you know how much fentanyl is required to kill an individual?
Thanks for the question, sir. So I don't have it right in front of me, but what I do have is, you know, last year we seized about 700 pounds of fentanyl in my sector between the ports of entry, which
you're giving my speech for me.
Yeah,
I'll get to that.
which is about enough to kill half the population of the United States.
Yes, sir. Well, the answer is 2 milligrams. And Agent Maudlin, is it true the Department of Homeland Security, you just mentioned it, but they seized over 9,400 pounds of fentanyl so far
I'm not
this
sure
year?
the exact number. I can speak for Tucson sector.
All right, that's your all's records. It's true. And approximately 76% or 7,200 pounds of that was seized coming through our southwest border. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir, that sounds correct.
Okay, and Agent Chavez, ma'am, I'm sure you would agree that 7,200 pounds of fentanyl is enough fentanyl to kill a lot of people.
I concur, sir. I agree.
Yes, ma'am. Do you all know how many people that 7,200 pounds of fentanyl could kill?
I don't, sir, but if 700 pounds is enough to wipe out half the United States, then obviously it's much more than the population of the United States.
Well, I'll do the math for you. It's 1.6 billion people with a B. That's enough fentanyl to kill every American almost 5 times over. And the bottom line is this country is on its way, I felt, to a secure border under President Trump. But President Biden put an end to that on his first day in office. And I believe Americans are dying as a result. And I'd like to change a little bit of direction here if we could and talk a little bit about the human trafficking issue. Agent Chavez, have you and your agents seen an increase, Chief Chavez, have y'all seen an increase in the number of human trafficking cases on the southwest border over the last 2 years?
We have, sir. There's been a significant increase in tractor load cases where people are being smuggled through trailers, and we've seen it mostly at our checkpoints.
Okay. How much of an increase have you seen? Do you know the percentage-wise, just at the southwest border?
Sir, I don't have the percentage numbers here in front of me.
Okay. Well, Homeland Security gave us those numbers, and it's 109% since fiscal year 2020. Human trafficking arrests have more than doubled. You know, I can't imagine the number of human traffickers and their victims who never get stopped, as you all do. Agent Chavez, do y'all ever come across children being trafficked across our southern border?
Yes, we do, sir. We see that often.
Are those victims of child sex trafficking, forced labor trafficking, or both? Or would you have any way of even knowing that?
But there's no way we can know that. That usually falls within the within Homeland Security investigations, our HSI agents under ICE.
Do the agents ever get an idea of where the human traffickers plan to take these victims, especially the children?
I don't have that information, sir.
Okay, you don't. Chief Maudlin, do you know where they plan to take those folks?
Thanks for the question, sir. So what I will tell you is, again, Tucson, very unique. So Tucson, the vast majority of those unaccompanied children are 17-year-old Guatemalan males. They are generally not being trafficked. If we're separating the terms, because they are very different between traffic and being smuggled, most of them are coming into the United States to work, sir.
And they're coming without parents?
Without parents, to move further into the United States.
Okay. Agent Chavez, you think it's easier for someone to walk across an open desert without having a wall in their way, or is it easier to walk across the same desert with a great big wall in their way?
Well, I think it would be easier to walk in an open desert with no barrier present.
Thank you. Agent Chavez, if fewer human traffickers were allowed into our country, don't you think we'd see the number of human trafficking victims and crimes decrease?
Well, yes, of course.
Thank you. Thank you all very much, and I really do appreciate you all being here. The people of America appreciate the great job that you all do for us and your patriotism for our country. Thank you all very much. Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Muskowitz for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you, Chiefs, for coming here today. And, you know, I appreciate, and I know the committee appreciates your service to the country. You know, this country has served as a beacon of freedom and a place where people can escape oppression. As someone whose grandparents escaped the Holocaust and came here because America was that beacon, it's important that America continue to be that beacon in the world for people escaping oppression, especially from their government. You know, the congressman that I replaced, nephew died from a fentanyl overdose, Ted Deutsch. And, you know, one of the words that he mentioned, and I'm going to read something that he in an editorial he wrote, It says, we cannot wait until it's all personal to us. It's time for us to pass the many bipartisan bills introduced this Congress that will protect the health and well-being of the American people in state legislatures. It's time to adopt drug laws to support rather than stigmatize Americans in need. Time to broaden access. We need to rise above the polarization, the cheap shots, the partisan fights, to powerfully face the harsh realities of fentanyl. Those words could not be more true than in this hearing, because all we're doing in this hearing is politicizing another issue in this country that doesn't need to be politicized. We all agree that fentanyl is a problem. You made a statement earlier about fentanyl, and there was a question, I think, by Congressman Perry. He said, fentanyl is coming in illegally. I have a question. Does any fentanyl, and this is for either of you, does any fentanyl come into this country legally? It's an easy one.
Sir, yes, thanks for the question. And my understanding is, of course, fentanyl is used in medical procedures.
Okay, but it's not coming, whether it's to the port or any other place, right? It's not coming through a legal process. That's all illegal.
No,
It's not a trick question.
Sir, if I'm understanding correctly, if you're talking about fentanyl that's being used medically, then yes.
I'm not talking about medical fentanyl. We don't have a problem with things escaping pharmacies. I'm talking about stuff that's coming through when it comes through a port, right? That's illegal, correct?
Yes. Oh, so yes. So I apologize. Now I do understand. And I think that gets to my earlier point, is that for us, it's not important if it's coming through the port or between the ports. When my sector.
Well, so that's good. I just want to stop you there. I appreciate that it's not important where it comes from because it's about the fentanyl, right? So then why is the majority only talking about 1 out of every 9 pills that are coming into this country, right? If 90% are coming through ports of entry, that means 9 pills they don't want to talk about. They only want to talk about 1 pill, which is the 10%, right? Shouldn't we be talking about all of it? Shouldn't they be as concerned as they are as it coming across the Rio Grande as if it comes across the port?
Well, sir, I would say anyone that's lost a loved one to fentanyl probably doesn't care if it came through the port or between the ports of entry. It's all important, as you said, and whoever's transporting it, unimportant to us as well.
No,
our job is to secure the border.
No, that's exactly right. And look, I understand you guys aren't the experts on all things fentanyl. The chairman didn't bring those experts here today. A lot of the members over there voted against funding for you guys, right? Voted against all the things you say you need. They voted against all that stuff. So they say they're strong on the border, but when it comes to funding it, they didn't want to do it. We've heard statistics today about, apprehensions and all of that stuff, but, one of the things I find fascinating is, we're beefing up the border and we're apprehending more people. They want to spin that as a bad thing, that apprehending more people means more people are trying to get in. Well, news for them, in 2019, 3,707 pounds of narcotics were seized in 2019. That's more than in 2022. So does that mean more narcotics are coming in 2019? It's possible. They're focused on the realm of the possible rather than the facts. Let me give you another fact. I'm concerned about fentanyl getting into children. But you know what I'm also equally concerned about that they're not concerned about? The leading cause of death among kids between 1 and 19 is not fentanyl. It's guns, right? There's not going to be any oversight for the children that are buried in a cemetery. We're coming on the 5-year anniversary of Parkland, where parents are going to go visit their kids in a cemetery, right? There's no oversight hearing on the epidemic that's going on with kids and guns, but we should be equally concerned about fentanyl with kids and guns with kids. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Chief Modlin. Thank you for Chief Chavez for coming in and speaking with us today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about unaccompanied minors. I'm sure this is a very serious situation that you're familiar with. Under the Trump administration, with Title 42, can you tell me when you had unaccompanied minors, what would happen to those children?
Thank you for the question, ma'am. So Before or after Title 42? So my point is Title 42 did not affect how we deal with unaccompanied children. We do not expel unaccompanied children. So when unaccompanied children are encountered, they're brought into our custody. We make sure they get any medical attention they need, showers, change of clothes, all of that. And then they're turned over to HHS's ORR within 72 hours.
And that's how it's handled right now under the Biden administration?
That's how it's been handled for as long as I've been handling unaccompanied children, ma'am.
And were they sent back to their home countries before the Biden administration?
Not to my knowledge. But again, ma'am, what I would say is, again, that's much further down the process than where the Border Patrol is. So once we encounter them, whether it was 3 or 4 years ago or yesterday, they're brought into our custody, assessed, and then eventually turned over to ORR. Where they end up, that's much longer after we have them.
Many of them were sent back to their home countries before under Trump's administration. I want to talk to you a minute about, are you familiar with, there was a 20-year-old autistic woman in Maryland who was strangled to death by an illegal alien here, 17-year-old MS-13 gang member. Under the program as it is right now, many of the MS-13 gang members are being brought in the country as unaccompanied minors. They're very young. They're under 18, and then their numbers have doubled, maybe tripled in our country. What have you seen with that?
Again, ma'am, thanks for the question. My personal experience in the 2 years I've been in the Tucson sector, I'm unaware of any significant amount of MS-13 gang members within the unaccompanied children population.
Well, how are you able to know if they're gang members or not? Do you have an MS-13 gang database that you're able to search them up in there and somehow find out if they're gang members or not?
So, ma'am, with our agents that have a significant amount of training and experience, there are things they look for. There are certainly, as you know, you've probably seen photographs of MS-13 gang members with significant amount of tattoos. Sometimes it's simply an admission of it. Sometimes it may be other things that trigger agents to start questioning.
Right, but Chief Modlin, they may not have had all their tattoos yet, being that they're young and under 18. Being 15 or 16-year-old. As a matter of fact, they are coming in the country at a much higher rate. That's why this 20-year-old autistic woman was killed, because of an illegal alien, a 17-year-old MS-13 gang member, and she'd be alive today if our border was secure. One of my Democrat colleagues was talking about the wall as if it doesn't work. I assure you that the Democrats believe in walls because they've erected one around the Capitol today because President Joe Biden is delivering his State of the Union address to the country. Walls do work, and we want you to have a wall as one of the toolkits in your box to stop the illegal invasion into our country that's occurring every single day. Are you aware of how many fentanyl deaths that the percentage increase in my home state of Georgia?
Ma'am, I'm unaware.
Well, I'll just let you know, fentanyl deaths have increased to 350% in Georgia. We're not a border state. We're not along the southern border, but fentanyl deaths have gone up 350%. Are you aware of how much money the Mexican cartels make selling fentanyl, or what their industry makes?
Ma'am, again, thank you. So what I do know is that the cartels are making billions, and whether it's fentanyl, whether it's moving people across the border, everything's a commodity to them. And to your point earlier, you not being a border state, it has been said many times, and I completely agree that every state is a border state, ma'am. Everything that happens on the border affects the entirety of the country.
Absolutely, and that's why a young lady in Maryland should be alive today, because our border should be secure. It's a $20 billion industry, the cartels have, $20 billion. And that's because our border is not secure. Now, we appreciate the job that you do, both of you, and we're thankful for you, but we are completely against the policies of the Biden administration that's allowing the murder of over 300 Americans a day from fentanyl, allowing the Mexican cartels to illegally make over $20 billion, and allow our country to be invaded every single day. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
Lady Jill's back. Chair recognizes Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'd think that the cartels were created 2 years ago. The cartels have been operating for decades and decades, and as someone who actually prosecuted cases relating to drug trafficking by international narcotics organizations, let's remember
that this has been a pervasive problem for a long time. But Chief Modlin, I am very happy to hear you say that you and your excellent team has dramatically increased fentanyl apprehensions over the past couple years. It means that the increased funding and the new policies of the Biden administration are working on the ground. And in fact, isn't it true that one of the new policies is to impose sanctions on some of these dangerous cartels, which had not been done in the Trump administration? Is that right?
Thanks for the question, sir. So I am unaware of that particular policy, but certainly we greatly appreciate any help that we get on the border.
You know, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle clearly would like to go back to the immigration policies of the Trump administration. So I want to take a minute just to look at those. Chief Chavez, are you familiar with something called the El Paso Initiative?
I am not, sir.
Well, the El Paso Initiative was conducted from March to November of 2017, and it was a pilot program that operated in your sector, the Rio Grande Valley, that resulted in the separation of at least 280 families. Does that sound familiar to you?
Oh, yes, the El Paso Prosecution Initiative.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for clarifying. In fact, that's actually where I'm going with this, because what differed is the prosecution of immigrants who coming across the border. This was a pilot program that you were intimately familiar with, isn't that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And in fact, you didn't notify for quite a while your senior leadership of this pilot program. Is that correct?
Congressman, thank you for the question. But
No, it was just a simple question. I don't have a lot of time.
well, it's pending litigation, so I can't really answer specific questions
Fair
related to that.
So we've heard a lot about unaccompanied minors, who by definition of being unaccompanied minors, wouldn't you agree, crossed the border without any families, right?
In general, yes, unaccompanied minors cross the border without families.
And you're aware that under our immigration law, those detained by immigration enforcement must be released within 72 hours, right?
Must be, yes, sir.
Okay.
Correct.
And when individuals are detained or in immigration detention, they're kept together with their families, right?
We make every effort for individuals to stay together with their families unless an adult has a criminal history. That adult is processed separately by policy.
Immigration detention processing separately.
Correct.
Okay. But it is also true, right, that a violation of a criminal statute means that both an individual can be detained longer than 72 hours and that they cannot be detained with their family. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So let's talk about the child separation policy. Title 18 United States Code Section 1325 is a misdemeanor for improper entry into this country. And I can tell you I spent 10 years as a federal prosecutor. I had never even heard of this statute. But this was what was used, am I right, to make sure that parents were separated from their children, correct? The parents were charged with Section 1325?
Again, I cannot comment as there is pending litigation.
All right.
On
Well,
this case.
I think we all know that is the case. And, you know, there have been, as you say, there's litigation going on. This was a cruel and inhumane policy that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would like us to return to. The old, antiquated immigration policy that separated children from their families. And Mr. Palmer earlier talked about having an organized process. And I agree, and you guys have mentioned this. Let's increase the number of immigration judges to process asylum claims so that we can move through the system faster. Let's increase the number of visas so that there is an organized process to welcome immigrants into this country. The Trump administration reduced the number of visas by 11 million. So, you know, let's have this organized process. And let's remember that for fiscal year 23, The Biden administration increased funding for you and other law enforcement agents at the border security by 17%, but the Republicans voted against it. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. McClain for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I want to start out by saying thank you for being here, but more importantly, thank you for doing what you do to try and protect this nation at the border. I think at times we get a little bit lost in our partisan politics, and your job and what you do is increasingly important. It has been highlighted, if ever before, and the job that you do to try and keep this nation safe should be applauded and not condemned. So let me applaud you for the job you do. In the interest of time, I just want to go through some questions to make sure I have the facts correct. And I'll start with you, Chief Molden. Do you know how many potential terrorists were apprehended last year?
Thanks for the question, ma'am. And I know you're going fast, but I do just want to say is thank you for applauding us. What I would say is that, honestly, our jobs in the big scheme of things are fairly easy. It's the agents on the ground every day that are hiking in those mountains and risking their lives to save the migrants and apprehend people that really should be applauded. But
and please
I will bring it
extend
back.
our thank you to those agents as well.
Yes, ma'am. And in terms of the numbers, no, so I do not know. I do know in the Tucson sector, which is what I represent, there were 2 or 3 last year. I believe it was 2 persons that were on the watch list.
And again, sir, just in the interest of time, we are in agreement that CBP has apprehended individuals on the terror watch list. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. CBP data that I have said reports 98 suspected terrorists apprehended just last fiscal year on the southern border. Would you have any reason to doubt that, or do you think that's inflated or deflated? Does that sound directionally correct?
I don't have any reason to doubt that, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am?
No,
Okay.
Congresswoman.
That is a substantial increase from prior years. Is that correct as well?
That sounds about right.
Okay. And would you agree there are a high number of gotaways?
That is correct, ma'am.
Okay. And again, I'm just trying to get the facts, trying to leave the personalization out of it. In fact, CBP estimated that there were over 500,000 people that got away in fiscal year 22. Sound correct?
Yes, ma'am, that sounds correct.
And given the number of people slipping past CBP, are you concerned that terrorists could be exploiting this chaotic situation to slip through the cracks?
Again, ma'am, in terms of the gotaways, I think it'd be irresponsible to try to assume who they were. All I do know is that a lot of people do get away from us.
Fair assessment. Fair assessment. Also, would you agree that given the high number of illegal boarding crossings, the potential for a terrorist slipping through is higher than in previous years? I mean, just by sheer means of volume.
I don't want to speculate, ma'am, but as Chief Motlin mentioned, we don't want to assume the unknown. We are concerned always, of course, because to us what matters is who and what comes between those ports of entry, and that we're able to identify every single person that comes through.
And are you doing that?
And we're not able to do that at this time.
I know, and I don't mean that any disrespect. You're doing the best you can.
That is what the challenge is.
With what you have. Would you agree that this presents a significant national security risk?
When we don't have the right amount of resources, the technology, the infrastructure, the personnel, where agents can get to every bit of location across that border to ensure that we have the vigilance necessary to find every person that's crossing illegally, then we have a high probability that.
So would that be a yes?
We don't know who's coming across, yes.
Okay. In terms of the cartels, have they become more active on the border in recent years or less active?
It is my belief and my experience that they've become more active in recent years.
Thank you. So throughout this hearing, we've highlighted several issues that have both arisen because of the open border crisis. My final question is, would you agree that our catch and release policies are actually incentivizing more people to try and illegally cross our borders or deter them?
I think that with the current situation that we've been faced with here in the last year, where we are working now with we only have 4 dispositions to work with, which is return, remove, transfer to another agency, or release. I think that everyone nowadays has a cell phone. So when migrants are released into a community, they immediately contact their relatives, they contact others. So then that sort of
So you would agree with
incentivizes
me that it
people to come
actually
across.
incentivizes more,
Correct.
right? It's like with our children. If we tell them that our curfew is 11 o'clock, but they come home at 11:30 and there's no consequences to their action, that only incentivizes them to come home at 11:30, even though their curfew is at 11. So I appreciate that. I think it's clear that these policies put in place by this administration has opened the door for dangerous individuals, including but not limited to terrorists, to cross into our nation undetected. These policies are harming our citizens in a myriad of ways, and every day that goes by, our national security is more and more at risk. Again, I do thank you for the job you do and extend that gratitude to the people and men and women that are actually on the ground trying to secure our borders. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've gone over my time.
Lady yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. You know, much of the work of this committee is done alongside the work of the Government Accountability Office, which provides reporting to the Oversight Committee as well as the whole of government and the public about vulnerabilities in overall federal operations. In 2020, the GAO, said office, reported that Border Patrol does not currently have reliable information on deaths, serious injuries, and suicide attempts, and has not consistently reported deaths of individuals to Congress. And in 2022, the GAO again found that Border Patrol has not collected and recorded or reported to Congress complete data on migrant deaths or disclosed associated data limitations. Chiefs Chavez and Modlin, why is that?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. What I can tell you is that I think anytime a migrant dies in the desert, you know, in the mountains, it's horrific. And as discussed earlier, it's, you know, the cartels are putting these people in grave danger. In the area that I work, it's 4 or 5 days for most people to get to the border, up to a place where they can be picked up by a smuggler. So those are incredibly treacherous things. What I'll tell you too is often, you know, when someone is found in the desert that has perished, that person could have been there for 2 or 3 years. You know, the area that I work is very different than others. So I think our numbers probably tend to be a little harder to lock down. But I do know that certainly the numbers have increased this year, I believe nationwide. I don't think it's commensurate to the amount of people that are crossing, because one of the things that we've done is put a tremendous amount of focus. I've got close to 300 EMTs.
And I'm sorry, I just have to.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have much time. What about in custody? Deaths in custody or suicide attempts in custody?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. So information like that of migrants that attempt suicide or migrants that die in custody, we actually have evolved and have some really good record keeping. Maybe it's as a result of the GAO reporting. I'm not sure, but I know as a fact that when it comes to our central processing centers, we have now ramped up camera systems that are very robust. So now we're recording everything.
Understood.
So the tracking is impeccable now, where the reporting is constant for us.
Thank you. And we'll be sure to follow up on that information. And Chief Modlin, Pima County falls under your sector, correct?
Did you say Pima County, ma'am? Yes.
Thank you. Are you aware of the militia group known as Veterans on Patrol?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you aware that this organization is a designated hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center?
Yes, ma'am, I'm aware.
And are you aware that agents in Pima County, CBP agents in Pima County, have had regular contact and according to this report, seems to have received assistance from this organization?
Ma'am, I think it's important to define what assistance is. What I will tell you is whether it's Pima County or any of the other 3 border counties, if someone calls and says there's illegal activity on the border, then we do respond. And obviously some of those calls will come from militia groups, whether it's that or others, or sometimes there's other groups out there, humanitarian groups as well, that will call us and tell us that someone's in need of medical response or something.
Thank you. I ask because Veterans on Patrol, again, a designated hate group, does publish quite a bit of their own media, which includes agents in some of these videos that they post. In one, over the course of the conversation, an agent greets militia members with a high five. This is an organization that spreads anti-Semitic conspiracies and beyond. And I was wondering if your sector has a policy regarding agents interfacing with known members of designated hate organizations.
Thanks again for the question, ma'am. So what I can tell you is that I don't know that it's possible to separate all interaction with any group that's down on the border. Certainly, we do not encourage militia groups or anyone else to be in the border environment. But we do respond, again, if someone calls and says there's someone in distress that needs us or that they've witnessed some illegal action on the border.
If you were to discover agents actively working with hate groups and militias, would their employment be terminated?
So our agents, ma'am, are all part of a bargaining unit. So that there is, CBP has a table of penalties, and then of course that they're afforded right to representation and stuff. So I don't know that I could say that, what would and wouldn't trigger an automatic termination, but there would certainly be a disciplinary process.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Boebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much to our witnesses. Thank you for our sector chiefs for being here present with us today. This is the first time in the Biden administration that we have had the privilege to have our Customs and Border Patrol agents here present with us in Washington, D.C. So I appreciate you being here. I would like to ask you both, do you think that you were brought here today to promote white nationalism? Mr. Maudlin?
Thanks for the question, ma'am. I can tell you I absolutely was not brought here for that reason.
Thank you. Chief Chavez?
No, ma'am, I was
Thank
not.
you. Chief Maudlin, compared to 2 years ago, is Border Patrol finding more or less dead bodies of people trying to cross the border?
So within the Tucson sector, because that is my purview, I can tell you that we are encountering more migrants that have died in the
Thank you, Chief Maudlin. That is correct, and in fact, nearly 1,400 dead bodies have been found along the southern border since Biden took office. Each year has been a record high and a 300% increase since the Trump administration. Chief Maudlin, do you know border counties that have had to procure mobile morgues just to try to keep up with the increased volume of dead bodies Border Patrol is finding?
Ma'am, I'm unaware of that within the Tucson sector. What I can tell you, though, is that we work very hard to try to prevent any migrant deaths out there. So as I was starting to say earlier, close to 300 EMTs and paramedics, a great ability to lift agents on Blackhawks, get them to people very quickly to prevent
With
that.
all due respect, thank you, Chief Maudlin. Just last year, Culberson County Sheriff Oscar Carrillo was forced to deploy a corpse trolley after finding so many bodies, so many more bodies than in years past. These counties are using their limited resources to clean up Joe Biden's mess. This sheriff stated, quote, "I used to request regular stuff like bulletproof vests. Now I'm asking for more body quotes, end bag." Chief Maudlin, compared to 2 years ago, is Border Patrol arresting more illegal aliens found to have criminal convictions or fewer?
Ma'am, so in terms
More or
of
fewer,
pure,
please, Chief.
Ma'am,
More or fewer?
more.
Thank you. In fact, Border Patrol arrested more than 12,000 last year, up from 2,500 in fiscal year 2020. That's almost a 400% increase. Now, what about terrorists? Is Border Patrol encountering more or less people with records in terrorist screening databases? Chief Maudlin.
Ma'am, my understanding more commensurate with
Thank
the
you, Chief.
increased flow.
In fact, CBP encountered 98 potential terrorists last fiscal year. That's compared to just 6 during President Trump's entire time in office. Now, Chief Chavez, I've visited your sector. What about known gotaways? Have those increased over the last couple of years, known gotaways?
They have, ma'am.
Yes, I have that information as well. On Biden's watch, there have been over 1.2 million known gotaways, and of course, we don't know the unknown gotaways. Now, Chief Maudlin, do Would you agree that gotaways included convicted criminals, terrorists, drug traffickers, or even gang members?
Ma'am, as I've stated, I don't think I can suppose
Thank you, Chief.
anything.
Chief Chavez, are you aware prosecuting and imprisoning these any drug trafficking criminals caught by state and local law enforcement comes out of their local budgets?
I am aware that the county and local law enforcement bear the cost
Yes.
of the detention for criminal.
And our local communities are being forced to foot the bill for Joe Biden's border crisis. What about CBP officers committing suicide? Now, I have seen the despair in Border Patrol agents' faces. Their morale is certainly decreased. They are unable to do the job that they swore to do. Would you say that that has increased in the past 2 years? I'll let both of you answer yes or no.
It has, ma'am. In the last 2 years, Border Patrol has had 13 suicides, 5 in RGV, and it's a terrible thing that we experience.
Thank you, Chief. My time is almost up. Chief Modlin, yes or no? Are
Yes,
suicides
ma'am.
up? Yes,
Agree
thank
with
you.
Chief Chavez.
Unfortunate and disgraceful. And I have one final question. Chief Modlin, you were asked if there was a policy change, if there was laws changing, and that it was possibly, you answered that it was possibly rumors that people were coming here to our country illegally because of something they had heard. But wouldn't you agree that policy did change? Under President Trump, it was catch and deport. And under Biden, it is catch and release into the interior of our country. They are no longer waiting outside of our country for asylum. They are being released into our country on the honor system. And so with that, we are seeing an increase of terrorists, 1,500%, gang members coming across that have doubled, illegal crossings with criminal convictions up 400%, dead bodies being found up to 300%, and CBP suicides at a decade high. So would you agree that the policy did change? And the truth is that there is an invasion happening at our southern border because of this policy change, and it's happening because Joe Biden invoked amnesty and changed the secure border policies that were working for our country, and he won't change it back because Democrats, and this is intentional. In fact, their policy is a success. It's not a failure because this is their intent.
Chair's lady's time has expired, but please feel free to answer the question.
Thank you, ma'am. So I stand by my response. All I know is what we're being told by people that have crossed, and they absolutely unequivocally said they crossed because they felt like law and policy had changed.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gomez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before I move on to my comment, I just want to point out to the representative from Colorado that we mourn with the CBP on the loss of their officer who died by suicide, but we also passed $23 million for suicide prevention for Border Patrol officers, which the majority ended up voting against in the omnibus bill. I'm about solving problems, but solving problems based on facts and having the right individuals here to answer questions. The majority likes to conflate a lot of facts or lack of facts or even made-up facts. And here's a fact. This is what we do know it's true. Despite what you have heard on the other side, 90% of fentanyl seizures happen at ports of entry, with the majority trafficked by U.S. citizens, not migrants and not asylum seekers. So why isn't the Office of Field Operations here to talk about our efforts to stop drugs trafficking at ports of entry? And it's because this hearing isn't about border security or solving our opioid crisis. It isn't even about facts. What it's about is painting immigrants as villains in order for my colleagues to further their anti-immigrant agenda. Republicans are trying to rewrite history to hide their extremist agenda from the American people. This extreme wing is trying to say that immigrants are trafficking fentanyl across an unchecked border. But we know that that's not true. Why? Because it happens at the ports of entry by U.S. citizens, not mainly by asylum seekers. And if you're wondering just how extreme, one bill they're trying to pass would end asylum as we know it, completely stopping asylum seekers trying to find safety in our country. And here's what one person said about the bill. Quote, "The reality is that this is a backdoor way of ending all asylum claims.
The asylum process is broken and needs major reform, but abolishment is un-American. And who said that? It wasn't a Democrat. It was Tony Gonzalez, a Republican from Texas. But their party isn't controlled by reason. It's controlled by the extreme QAnon caucus who spewed hate and xenophobia and tried to mislead the American people. In fact, 9 members of this committee are co-sponsors of the majority, are co-sponsors of the extreme bill. So let's be clear. The extreme MAGA plan will not secure our borders because they're not asking the right questions to the right individuals about the right facts. And it won't stop the flow of drugs. But it will harm real people. We have saw a man with a documented history of abuse and racist behavior go out and shoot 2 migrants, killing 1. In 2019, a man went to a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, and killed 22 people. He told police he wanted to kill Mexicans. Their hatred of foreign-born people and their blatant lies have consequences, and it's time that they own up to it. We know some House Republicans are already speaking out against this extreme anti-immigrant, and I quote, anti-American plan for the border. So if we really want to solve problems, we should bring the not only these witnesses, but other witnesses.
Yield for a question?
No, I won't. And one of the things I want to make sure is that we solve the problem with facts, right? If we want to talk about what happens between the ports of entry and what you're dealing with, let's talk about those facts. And what you need to solve it. But if we want to talk about the fentanyl crisis and how it's coming in and what's being needed, we should talk about those facts instead of conflating all the different issues. Right? That's what happens here in the U.S. House of Representatives. We cherry pick the facts that we want to see in order to make the points. But this is it is a difficult situation on the border. We get it. But usually in these hearings, what we try to do is use the 5 minutes to get the viral moment, to get the tweets, to get the likes, to get the more followers, right? But it doesn't really solve anything. So I feel like the majority is playing into that same song and dance, right? Not really trying to ask the right questions to the right witnesses, but just to further their narrative and the agenda that they want to push. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Fry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Chiefs, y'all being here today. I'm a little bit deja vu, Mr. Chairman, because just last week we had a border security hearing in Judiciary, and to hear my colleagues on the left in there and in here today, we're imagining things that are going on at the southern border, that we're not engaged in actual fact-finding missions, that we're not looking at the facts. Well, here are some of the facts. Fact, over 100,000 deaths associated with fentanyl just last year. Fact, border crossings are at an all-time high. Fact, millions of gotaways are in this country, and those have been increasing over the last 2 years than ever before. Fact, only 14% of those seeking asylum are legitimate asylum seekers. That was under a Trump administration and an Obama administration. Fact, ICE arrests and removals have decreased, I think according to one study, by 90% from 2019 to present day. And fact, as you testified to, walls work. Just real quick for both of you, can you provide me a real-world example on how border barrier systems or border walls have aided you or your agents in the field?
Specifically for RGV, in areas where we have high number of people crossing, when we have a border wall system or border barrier, if it's a full system, it brings in all-weather roads. It has lights for the nighttime. It has technology that assists us, right? So we don't have to have 20 agents in one zone or region or area. These agents can be mobile in other locations. That barrier, well-equipped, well-advanced technology will tell us if there's a detection or an incursion, so that way agents can maximize their coverage area elsewhere, so that way that product, that barrier, will do its job, and we can maximize the agents deployed elsewhere. Now, aside from that, a barrier is very useful because it also manages flow, and it directs flow into other locations where we can more effectively make an interdiction and more effectively make an arrest.
Chief Baldwin, would you agree with that statement by Chief Chavez?
Yes, sir, I would. And what I would say from my experience, when I started in San Diego back in 1995, we basically had maybe a 6 or 7 foot tall fence that was made up of landing mats. I think they were Vietnam era landing mats that were put down. And if you were to look at aerial photography of that area then versus now, much of that area that was just, it was uninhabitable because thousands of people would cross it every night, and the property crime rates were very high. It was just if you looked at it now, there's very expensive homes in those areas, and the community flourishes in an area that at one time was uninhabitable because of the way the border was. Currently, there's double wall through there and plenty of agents to
Are there areas of your sector that would that are currently unprotected by a border barrier that would be helpful to you and your agents?
Yes, Congressman. There's locations in my AOR, in my area of responsibility, that requires barrier that is unprotected at this current time, as well as gates. Gates are super important for us, and currently there's gates that are not there that leave us vulnerable.
Chief Molden.
So, Congressman, in my sector, the good news is we got about 120 miles of border wall system that we asked for. One of the challenges, though, is that it was never meant to be just the wall. It was supposed to be the wall system, the barrier, and then road as well, and fiber optic cable that would alert us when things were going on. I think one of our biggest challenges related to it now are the gaps that exist, which are slowly being remediated, just not in Tucson sector yet. But we look forward to those gaps being closed.
Thank you. Real quick, I know I have 1 minute left. Y'all seized an unprecedented amount of fentanyl just last year, China-sourced fentanyl, at most of the ports of entries. Wouldn't you agree that record overdose deaths from fentanyl among Americans indicate that a significant amount of fentanyl is slipping through the cracks of our southern border?
Sir, again, thanks for the question. I would say that as a Border Patrol agent, as the chief of the sector, I don't believe any of my agents care where it comes through. As long as it enters the United States, then it's certainly a threat to the children of the United States, to everyone that has potentially the potential ability to overdose. So regardless of where, if it's between the ports or at the ports, it's a threat.
But there is undetected fentanyl that is coming through that is not being apprehended by border agents. Is that correct? Is that
Yes,
fair
sir.
to say?
Yes, sir.
What forms of fentanyl or fentanyl-like substances are your agents encountering?
To our knowledge, primarily of biggest concern is the liquid fentanyl, is the latest threat that we have seen, especially as we continue to work in partnership with our local sheriff's departments, our local task forces. They continue to try to exploit our checkpoints. And I think Operation Stone Garden and the different types of programs that we have linked up with our task force have been effective, but liquid fentanyl is the latest one that we've seen the trend spike up on.
Chief Molden.
Sir,
the gentleman's time's expired, but please answer the question.
Thank you, sir. In my area, generally, it's pill form. A year or two ago, it was mostly the powder. It has certainly transitioned to pill form.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Chair recognizes Mr. Biggs for recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some documents to submit to the record. One is a piece entitled Preliminary Border Data Record Number of Apprehensions, gotaways in November. Another one, record number of apprehensions, gotaways in fiscal 2022 surpassed 3.3 million. And then the third is a letter that I received on January 10th from the Administration for Children and Families in response to my question on their follow-up calls for children who were placed with the ORR, where they admitted that they had lost contact with 42,577 children placed in their care during the Biden administration.
Without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes Ms. Brown for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Comer. Just want to get something clarified. It's been said that the people have heard the border was open during the Biden administration. So, Chief Molden, just can you clarify for me, have the laws changed between the administrations, yes or no?
Thanks for the question, ma'am. There's been no change in the law.
Thank you so much. People around the world look to the United States as a beacon of hope and freedom. Some of those facing poverty, war, and famine seek a better life here to make the American dream their reality. I am proud that Northeast Ohio has a long tradition of welcoming immigrants and refugees, most recently our Afghan allies and Ukrainians fleeing Putin's illegal war. Instead of talking about our immigration system in the abstract, it seems essential to highlight the suffering of those seeking refuge. These are real people with real stories who we have the power to help. Immigrants are also bringing us economic prosperity. In 2019 alone, immigrant households in Northeast Ohio contributed $1 billion in federal taxes and $520 million in local and state taxes. That same year, 8,300 immigrant entrepreneurs generated an amazing $204.8 million in business income in Northeast Ohio. The fact is, immigrants make us stronger. Let me say that again. Immigrants make us stronger. I want to share just one story from among thousands of families who have faced hardships and were determined to seek a better life in the United States. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a collection of immigrant stories from Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. This story is about Lucia, a mother from Venezuela who is seeking a better life, safer life for her 4 children living with physical disabilities. Lucia states, and I quote, her husband and 4 children had been seeking protection for almost a year before arriving in the United States. She and her family left Venezuela because she faced persecution for speaking out against the government for denying her children health care based on their class status. The anti-government video she shared circulated throughout social media and consequently resulted in government officials targeting her and her family. Fearing for her and her children's safety, Lucia decided to leave her home. Lucia and her family tried to seek asylum in the neighboring countries, but faced discrimination and mistreatment due to her children's disabilities. Lucia's only choice was to seek asylum in the United States. She finally made it to this country a year after fleeing Venezuela. Lucia and her family are still waiting for their asylum interview, but they are relieved that their children can be properly diagnosed and receive their hearing aids. Most importantly, the children can attend a school that accommodates their disability. This is what our American story is truly about, finding a better life in this great country. Now, unfortunately, some on the other side block important action to secure our border and provide humane pathways to immigration while claiming to have strong records on the issue. The hypocrisy does not go unnoticed. The Biden administration and congressional Democrats are here to work hand in hand to fix problems in our immigration system to make our country stronger, better, and more just. I hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle will come to the table and responsibly tackle our immigration system. Thank you so much. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, lady. Yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Luna for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to correct the record. It was Obama Biden who built the cages, aka chain link partitions, used by Border Patrol stations as a safety measure to guard against things like sexual assault. I know that we had heard earlier that Trump built cages. That is simply not true. And it is also, as seen behind me, Biden who put kids in shipping containers, something that the media wanted to fact check. But as you can see, these are shipping containers. Now, it is no secret that there is a crisis at our southern border. Obviously, Mayorkas was actually caught on a hot mic a couple of years ago saying that these numbers were unsustainable. We have approximately 325,000 children enter the U.S. under Biden administration, and these are unaccompanied minors a majority of the time, and it's vastly between these ports of entries. Now, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for unanimous consent to enter these 2 graphics into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
The Biden administration does not want to acknowledge these facts, and they certainly don't want to know who's coming into our country. It has been estimated that a shocking 60% of Latin American children who cross the border are caught by cartels and exploited for child pornography and drug trafficking, which would be roughly about 200,000 kids under this administration. As Representative Andy Biggs had stated, because of a letter that he received, 42,577 children have been lost. Just before I go into my next point, Chief Chavez, can you tell me the youngest age of a known rape victim that you've come across or that you've heard of?
I don't have the age, ma'am. I know that when we go to the Central Processing Center, and this was in El Paso, my intelligence agents as well as Homeland Security investigations agents, they do the debriefs at the center.
Do you have minors that are raped when crossing the border? Has it been an occurrence that has happened to either Chief Chavez or Chief Modlin? Yes or no, please. Sorry, we're limited on time.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes on my end.
Thank you. President Trump did expand biometrics collection to include DNA testing pilot program and fingerprinted children under the age of 14 to crack down on child smuggling and migrants posing as fake families. Now, I hear a lot of rhetoric saying that it was wrong for people to separate children, but I, as a Hispanic woman and a veteran, think that it is the right thing to do to separate children until you can biologically confirm that they are not being handed over into the hands of traffickers, and it is grossly irresponsible to hand those children that we might not have any idea if they're actually biologically related. Chief Modlin, would you agree that you would rather have a child to be confirmed to be a known family member than release them into the hands of a trafficker?
Thanks, ma'am. So I would agree. Anything that helps us determine the actual familial bond is positive.
Okay, so with my follow-up question on this one, are children currently having their biometric data being collected under this administration?
It depends on the age of the children, but 14 and above, they are, as I testified to earlier in Tucson sector, the vast majority are 17-year-old Guatemalan males. It's fairly rare to see young unaccompanied females in Tucson.
Are you able to collect at every sector in every section of the border?
I can't speak for the other sectors, ma'am, but
we do the same in RGV.
Okay. I would just like to also ask one more thing. A large part of your job is engaging in catching those that are engaging in human smuggling and trafficking. Do you believe that with more funding that you could do your job better?
Ma'am, I absolutely believe more funding, we can do our own job, we can do our job better, absolutely.
Ma'am?
I agree the same, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to close out with this because I know that we're limited on time here. For any member of this House of Representatives advocating to defund Border Patrol and ICE, not only are you complicit in engaging in aiding and abetting traffickers, but you are hurting minority children at that. And with my final question, can you please tell me, are a majority of Border Patrol agents white or Hispanic?
Ma'am, my understanding is the majority of Border Patrol agents are Hispanic. And as I've stated earlier, most of them are either first-generation migrants or migrants themselves.
I will close with this. Clearly, we don't have a white supremacy issue in this country. Clearly, it's an illegal immigration one. I thank you guys for your service, and please tell your counterparts, God bless them. Thank you. Chairman, I yield my time.
Lady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Edwards for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To each of our fine officers here, I thank you for your service at our border and all of those that are supporting you. I've heard from at least one member here this afternoon that they felt that they were the only person that represented a border district. I just completed a tour of the westernmost counties in North Carolina. Counties nestled down in the mountains, 1,000 miles away from the border. And every sheriff that I visited said that they felt that they were protecting their county from the border. They were a border county because they're seeing the influence into what was once mountains that seemed impenetrable to these types of behaviors, particularly the drugs. Mr. Modlin, I know that we have heard reports of how many pounds of fentanyl, gallons of fentanyl have been captured.
do we have any method to estimate how much fentanyl has actually made it through into the United States?
Thanks for the question, sir. To my knowledge, there is no way to estimate the amount that made it into the United States. It certainly, that estimation certainly wouldn't come from me.
I'd like to follow up. When you discover fentanyl coming in, can you tell us what that looks like? Is it in the back of a truck, a backpack? Did somebody swallow it in some container? What are the mechanisms that people are using to get the Chinese fentanyl into the U.S.?
Thanks again for the question, sir. So when we uncover fentanyl, usually it's in pill form. You've probably seen, because it's been widely discussed, some of the multicolored pills recently. I think my sector had one of the largest seizures of the multicolored fentanyl. It sort of looks a lot like candy would look like. We see that sometimes at our immigration checkpoints and then often between the ports of entry as well, or just on a traffic stop that Border Patrol agents make.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd just like to comment to the committee that we heard an argument from the other side earlier this afternoon that this was an issue of humanity, and I couldn't agree more. When I listen to the folks in Western North Carolina, I think that we have to consider the humanity, first of all, of those fine officers that are putting their lives at risk to deal with drug dealers, to deal with the increase in crime. We need to consider the humanity for the children that are losing their parents to overdoses, or the children that are seeing their brothers and sisters incarcerated for dealing with drugs. The humanity for young folks that are getting hooked on drugs and overdosing and living their lives. The humanity for parents that are losing their children to the fentanyl influx that we see in this country. Mr. Chair, I know we're running out of time. We've got some other deadlines, so I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The ranking member and I have agreed, and the votes have been called. I'm sure you all need a break. We have a few more people left for questions, and then we were going to do a closing statement. So at this time, the committee will stand in recess up until 10 minutes after the last vote. There are only 2 votes, I believe, so this won't last very long. So at this time, we'll be in recess until 10 minutes after the conclusion of the last vote.